This is a call to order the June 16th, 2021 mid-month meeting of the Ducktown Council. And I'll remind everyone that this mid-month meeting is a working session between the Town Council and the town staff, different from a regular meeting. At this time, I'd like to do a roll call of the council, the attorney, and the manager. This is Don Kingston, Mayor.
Monica Thibodeau, Mayor Pro Tem.
Rob Mooney, Council.
Sandy Whitman, Council.
Nancy Cavanis, Council.
Drew Havens, Town Manager.
Robert Hobbs, Town Attorney.
We also have in attendance Joe Hurd, the Director of Community Development, Lawyer Ackerman, Town Clerk, Kay Nickens, Deputy Town Clerk, Chief Ackerman, Chief Black, and Kristen Legner, our PIO. With that, we'll go on to item number 1, presentation, continued discussion with Ken Wilson of Coastal Protection Engineering regarding the 2022 Beach Renourishment Project, and presentation by Brian Lay and Dr. Grace Andrews of Project VESTA. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you, thank you. We were going to get them on first so they didn't have to listen to all my ramblings, but now I guess if they join late, they'll have to listen a little bit. But let's see, open this back up. It should be opened. All right, so the last time I was up here a couple of weeks ago or a month or so ago, we had kind of gone through the evolution of some of the engineering stuff that we've been working on in the background, and sort of fortuitously, or maybe the opposite of fortuitously, we had gotten some new data in about a week before. And so we were trying to pull all that together and you know, make sense, make heads or tails of all of these things, but you know, because of some of the new data, we wanted to take that into consideration as well. And some of the gravity of the decisions that needed to be made about the erosion rates being higher than had originally been anticipated. We wanted to come back here now today and give you an update on those numbers and provide a couple of options for the town to consider as we move forward and try to figure out how best to manage the project moving forward. So I'm going to do just kind of warming up here, getting into a couple of slides that you all have seen. So this is all of the numbers that are in that beach maintenance plan. Essentially, this is what's been budgeted for over the last couple of years since the 2017 project was built. These were kind of the numbers that we had in place, both the Dorian repair costs and the base renourishment costs, coming up to that $424,800, and the project is estimated to cost about $8 million. That includes all the construction costs, engineering costs. It's sort of an all-inclusive number. And then we talked a lot about these graphics and the difference between the design beach and the advanced fill. I just wanted to pop this one slide up there again to kind of illustrate that. In essence, we've got this design there that's supposed to stay there in perpetuity, that provides a certain level of storm damage reduction. And then we are working as best we can to predict what that advanced fill should be out there. And as the project goes along, we get better and better at predicting specifically what that number will be. And that's really the discussion that we've been having about that advanced fill. That'll continue in today. So these are those updated numbers that I've got for you. So in terms of the design beach, if we go back to the original design that was established back in 2014, we are measuring approximately 200,000 cubic yards of that design has been eroded into at this point in time in April 2021, or now we're June, but the survey was in April 2021. So the rate of loss that we're using in all of our calculations now that we've got data all the way to 2021 is just under 12 cubic yards per linear foot per year. The original, in parentheses there, the original estimate when we designed the project was we were assuming about 6 cubic yards. So we're still, with this new data, we're still about 2 times that original estimate of 6 cubic yards. We're in the 12 cubic yards, and that's why we're having some of these discussions. So if you take 11.9 cubic yard rate and you multiply it by the distance of the project, you come up with the project is going to lose about 94,200 cubic yards a year. And that works into a lot of the numbers that we'll talk about today. And so if you think in terms of we are 1 year out from construction, We are assuming that we're going to lose one more year of that 94,200 cubic yards between now and construction, and then we need 5 years of renourishment. You would say you've got 6 years there that you need to account for, which is that 565,000. So when we add that to the 196,000 at the top, we come up with this number of 785,000 cubic yards to sort of, think of it as sort of the Cadillac plan to put everything back the way that the original design was and anticipate this erosion rate that we believe is about twice what was originally planned for, okay? So that's essentially what this slide talks about. And the last time I was up here, we talked about some of this Delta numerical modeling that we've been working on, the different alternatives of placing, that base volume out there equally distributed, the upper limit of that volume equally distributed, and then a couple of these different scenarios, either preferential placement of some fill in the center or the southern or the northern. We talked about a lot of we talked about the information that came out of the initial numerical modeling alternatives, that alternative 3, which is placement of sand in the middle, and 4, placement of sand on the south end, was pretty similar, but we saw some benefits, a little bit better performance if we were to place that material up on the north. But again, that was dealing with all of the volume that we were talking about at the time. That was about 730,000. And then after those initial analyses, we also went through and ran a bunch of different simulations looking at reducing the amount of volume placed out there and running through those same 5 scenarios. Looking at spreading that, the scenarios I showed up there were essentially piling that extra material up about 3,000 feet of the roughly 8,000 foot long project. We looked at potentially spreading that a little bit further and how that impacts the performance of the project. We looked at those different slopes that we had talked about last time, the 1 on 15 versus the 1 on 10. And so we've taken all of that into consideration. And so from a purely engineering standpoint, thinking in terms of that original design that we had developed, we would say that the design recommendation would in a perfect world be the placement of that 785,000 cubic yards of fill to replace the design loss, to anticipate this one more additional year of erosion between 2021 and the construction, and then 5 years at that 11.9 cubic yard rate that I just talked about. And if you were going to place all that material, we would say, let's repair the dunes in the areas where the design dune is not intact, place fill based on alternative 3 configuration. So we, looking at all these different simulations of changing the density and putting it in the south and the north and the central, the different slopes, we believe that the one that would provide the best bang for the buck if we were going to try to preferentially put some sand in one place would be the placement of that sand in the center, okay? So if we do something like that, that would be our recommendation, spread around 3,000 feet, and then construct that berm slope at actually the 1 on 15 as opposed to the 1 on 10. So it's essentially that 1 on 15 will bring the change in the slope when they build this dry sand beach out there at 6 foot elevation, and then that slope starts sloping down gently at 1 on 10, 1 on 15. If we go 1 on 15, it means we need more volume to build the shallower slope, so that break point where the flat sand beach ends will actually be a little bit landward in the 1 on 15. But we believe that the performance is a little bit better with that 1 on 15 because it's not sticking quite out as far. So I'd be happy to take some additional questions.
Is this a good time for questions, or do you want to do after you finish the whole thing? When you just said that, I wasn't sure what you
Right. No, I mean, if there's something specific about that slide or clarification.
Only that, if I'm understanding you correctly, this is more sand than you said, last analysis. And again, that was quick stuff. You had just had it for a week. I think you said 730, but your modeling showed that it was better to do it in alternative 5, the northern side. But now with more sand, I'm just curious, is it just more refined analysis?
Yeah, I wouldn't say
makes you go to the middle?
I wouldn't say the volume has changed our opinion. I would say that looking at all, because depending on what the scenario is, if you back off the volume, if you change the slope. Different alternatives were performing better than other ones. And so there really is sort of a meshing of all these different simulations, probably 4 different simulations of all 5 alternatives, 4 different scenarios of all five alternatives. And kind of taking all of that and digesting it is why, at this point in time, all things being equal, we think that putting it in the center would be. Once we settle on what this volume would be, what I'd like to do is go back and run that volume one more time with what we're recommending and ensure that, you know, what we believe is correct is that the model agrees with that. Now that we've got a specific volume of sand that we're anticipating placing out there. So that last bullet down at the bottom says, if the cost to construct the recommended project exceeds the town's budget, other options can be considered. And so that's what I want to talk a little bit about. Yes, sir.
Project VESTA, the folks from Project VESTA are on. Might be a good time for them to talk about free sand.
Okay.
And then we can talk about the costs. So I'll introduce it. So Dr. Grace Andrews and Brian Lay from Project VESTA are on Zoom. Project VESTA is interested in partnering with the town of Duck to provide free sand. Likely it's not going to be in this nourishment cycle, but in a future one. I will let them explain the benefits and so on and how they pay for it of Olivian sand. So if we can, with your permission, Mayor, we'll ask Dr. Andrews and Mr. Lay to join the meeting and make their presentation.
That's fine.
Well, hello, everybody. This is Brian Lay. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Project VESTA. I'm joined here by my colleague, Dr. Grace Andrews.
Hi, hi everyone. My name is Grace Andrews. I'm the Director of Scientific Operations at Project VESTA. I thought I would start just by telling you a little bit about myself. So I have a PhD in Earth Science from Northwestern University.
We need to turn your volume up. I'm sorry. We can't hear you.
Are you able to hear me all right? Is this volume okay? Okay,
Yes.
Great.
How is this?
Better.
Better. Okay, great. So my name is Grace Andrews and I'm the Director of Scientific Operations at Project VESTA. I thought I would tell you a little bit about myself. So I have a PhD in Earth Science from Northwestern University, where I specialized in aqueous isotope geochemistry. The focus of my research there was understanding a process called chemical weathering, which is the foundational science behind the technology we'll be talking to you about today. Following my PhD, I spent 4 years working for a nonprofit in the UK called the Leverhulme Center for Climate Change Mitigation. This center is dedicated to doing the R&D behind the same technology we'll be presenting here, but implemented in agricultural areas as opposed to beaches. So at the Leverhulme Center, I launched this technology at ag sites here in the US, specifically in Illinois, as well as in the UK, Malaysia, and Australia. So, and of course, now I work for Project VESTA to do the same in coastal areas.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. And one of the things that I think is important to talk about as we walk you through what we do at Project VESTA is this is not an entirely new technology. It's been studied for over 30 years, but we are going to explain how it's relevant to you as far as reducing some of the taxpayer burden of the increasing amount of sand you're going to need in the coming decade. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, if that's all right with everybody. And we'll run through a very short presentation. It'll be about 7.5 minutes, and then we'll spend the rest of time answering any questions. So can everybody see my screen right now? It should say Project VESTA.
Yes. Yes.
Great. So I'm going to minimize my face. So Project VESTA, we really focus on taking this to the coast and focusing on coastal protection with free, what we call carbon removing sand. And we're going to explain what do we mean by that, why is it free, but first a little bit more about the background of the team, because I think the elephant in the room here is that you haven't met us yet. I am from North Carolina, but what you should know is that our team comes from a really wide background of experts from across the industry. Actually, I'm going to switch to this one. I think some of it's being cut off, so bear with me for a second. I'm going to go present this. This is in Google, so you may see loading and a black screen for a second. Can everybody see this now? This should be a little bit better for you. Full screen? Perfect. So yeah, everyone from collaborators in Hawaii to Yale are contributing to this project. And I think the thing you need to know is that we have a really deep, experienced team behind what we're about to show you today. So a little bit about my background. I was born and bred in North Carolina. I grew up in Cary, North Carolina. My dad was a professor at NC State. I went to UNC, and I spent my entire childhood on the Outer Banks playing in the sand. And as I grew up and I went through a few entrepreneurial ventures and I started looking at beach nourishment and coastal protection, the real problem I saw was how are we going to pay for it when the problem is getting more and more intense each year? Rising sea levels, storm surges, hurricanes, not to mention the secondary effects that are affecting our coastal communities like ocean acidification. And frankly, and there's no easy way to say this, the last time atmospheric CO2 levels were this high, Duck, North Carolina was actually underwater. And I think what we want to dive into is how do we address both the underlying problem as well as the immediate cost problem. And what's driving this is that everybody needs sand. So Miami, the city of Miami is one of our partners in this. And should you choose to engage with us, you'd be beside them. We're working with their Chief Coastal Resilience Officer, Alan Dodd, sometimes called Colonel Dodd. And Miami alone in the next couple of years is going to need over 9 million tons of sand. So everybody is looking for sand. Terrestrial sources of sand are getting more expensive because they're being competed for by construction, and offshore sand is getting harder to find. You're going to have to travel further to get it as nearshore borrow pits are becoming depleted because everyone's going for that sand. And I think we would all agree that the approach of emitting fossil fuels to move sand around to try to deal with the effects of rising sea level is not a winning long-term strategy. And so we're going to present a different way to look at this and why we're potentially excited to work with you based on our initial analysis of Duck. So the solution here is free sand. It's free sand for you. We're going to explain why it's free. But the vision here is fundamentally to turn beach nourishment as an activity and as an industry from a carbon emitting activity, burning carbon to remove sand around, to a carbon removing activity. And in the process, reducing taxpayer burden because other people are willing to pay for carbon removal. And I'll hand it over to Grace to talk about what do we mean by carbon removing sand and how it works.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Yeah, so carbon removing sand, basically it's made of the mineral olivine. So olivine, it's a clean upland material, meaning it's mined. And because it's mined, we can customize the grain size of that olivine to match your specific beach sand. So we can be entirely compatible with your project. Olivine, it's also a silicate mineral. So that's just like the mineral quartz, which is the primary mineral in your beach sand. So because they're both silicates, what that means is they have a very similar physical structure. So they're going to feel the same beneath your feet. And finally, when olivine is mixed with your sand at about a 10% ratio, there will be no change in color. So you can see here, there's a picture on the left, that's a typical silicate beach sand. And on the right is that same beach sand mixed with 10% olivine, no difference. So if you're curious about, after this meeting, about working with us, we would be happy to send you a sample for you to see, touch, play around with, and get a handle on for yourself. Now, I'm going to take you back to high school chemistry class for just a moment to explain how this works, so bear with me. But basically, the way this works to capture carbon breaks down to two chemical reactions. So the top reaction shows us that when atmospheric CO2 combines with water, you actually form an acid. And when we put olivine in coastal areas in contact with that acid, that olivine slowly dissolves over decades and forms dissolved carbon. And that's what this technology is all about. So what we're really doing here is we're taking CO2 from the atmosphere and we're moving it into the ocean via olivine in a dissolved form. And that dissolved carbon is stable and permanently stored in the ocean over thousands of years. So scientifically, this is a process called chemical weathering, and I encourage you all to Google it and read about it yourself. It's a completely natural process that goes on all the time, all around us, wherever you have rock coming into water. It's actually the process that controls Earth's atmospheric CO2 levels on geologic timescales anyway. It's just that that natural process is very slow. So here at Project VESTA, the only thing we're trying to do with this technology is speed up a natural process by intentionally putting the right rock in the right place. And now I'll let Brian explain to you how we can get you the sand for free.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. So when we talk about putting the right rock in the right place, the reason other people are willing to pay for us to do this and to subsidize your projects is that people will pay for removing carbon today. So in the short term, we're really blessed to have a very deep bench of nonprofit donors backing this. So this includes the CTO of Facebook, the founder of Solar City and Elon Musk's cousin, Peter Reeve, as well as several other Silicon Valley billionaires that are preferring to stay anonymous right now. Long term, what you're going to see more of is a global carbon credit market. We're already seeing this from companies like Stripe. We sold $250,000 worth of carbon removal to them. Microsoft, Amazon, and others are all making pledges, and governments are doing the same thing. So there's a budding market of hundreds of millions of dollars already that are willing to pay for ways to remove carbon. And that's how the sand is free, as other people are paying for the carbon removal that happens. Some of the initial partners on this, because it always matters who else is participating. I mentioned the city of Miami and Alan Dodd there. Please feel free to kind of look him up and see his background. We're also working on some projects in the Hamptons, and we have a variety of partners around the world, including mines where this material is mined and then turned into sand to match your native grain type, like Sibelco. Sibelco is based in Norway, but they actually own quite a few mines that are not currently operational yet in North Carolina. And we believe that if we're successful here, we can probably make this a full closed loop North Carolina system as we scale up. So the good news behind all of this is that more people are willing to pay for carbon removal than ever before. So Elon Musk has put up the largest prize as far as an X Prize in human history for carbon removal technology. We think that there's really a winning story here of combining, a global need to remove carbon with a local need for coastal protection with reduced taxpayer burden for it. And so the vision here, if you're curious to explore it with us, is to make Duck the climate innovation hub for North Carolina, and to secure your town free sand for generations. So perhaps not in 2022, but future projects we're going to be able to increasingly contribute and mutually help everyone out. Our ask is, if you're curious to explore this with you, that you affirm that you'd like to partner with us. It can be something as simple as an email. It allows Grace and I to bring more researchers, more scientists into the area, and then town level advocacy for the regulatory process. Going to a regulator and saying, hey, we have this carbon removing sand, it's not as efficient when we do it ourselves. It really matters that the local on the ground coastal communities want this solution and are willing to advocate for it. So just curious, what do you think about this? Do you like this?
Absolutely.
Sure. Quick question on the olivine that is in the water, in the sand, that 10%, it reduces the acidity of the water of the ocean. So is that permeating out to up and down the coast, or is it, how is this such a good thing for the environment, I guess is one of my questions.
Yeah, so it's good for the environment in two ways. So it reduces the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, which is what's driving climate change. So it helps mitigate climate change. And it's good for the ocean because, as you've said, it de-acidifies the ocean. So ocean acidification is a term that you may have heard of, in that this is what's detrimental to coral reefs, for example, and generally the marine environment. So by de-acidifying the ocean, we can help restore some of the natural ecosystems.
How do you put it on the beach?
Yeah, how do you get it? You mix it.
Yeah. So we're actually partnering with organizations like Great Lakes Dredging and Docks and other dredgers, as well as coastal engineering companies like Kin represents. It depends on the project. So at some scale, we're exploring putting it in offshore borrow pits and then having the dredge suck it up there. So that would be at larger scale. If you'd like to do even a smaller scale, super reined in test deployment, it could be trucks. So it really depends on the scope of the project and the needs of the nourishment. But to summarize your question directly, it can be trucks if that's how the nourishment project is happening, or dredges if that's how the nourishment project is happening.
Does this item hold our sand on the beach better, or is it equal to the sand?
Yeah, so it's equal to the sand. So it's designed to match your fill material. So it won't be better, but it won't be worse for maintaining the coastline.
And how do you mix it together? Or does it matter if it's well mixed or not?
Yeah, I can speak to this a little bit. The ocean is a great natural mixing machine, but like I said, if it's in an offshore borrow pit and you're adding it as the dredge sucks it up, it can mix it at the right ratio. Or if it's a smaller deployment, they can just add it into the hopper. And then same thing for trucks. So mixing is typically not an issue.
Okay.
Dr. Andrews, back to Sandy's question about would it make the sand more efficient? Is there a reason why you wouldn't want to engineer the sand to perhaps stay on the beach longer?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, no, the reason being, so to sort of conceptualize this, smaller grain sizes tend to transport further away from your coastline. And so you don't want your grain size to be too small, because that will just take all the olivine away. But in this case, you also don't want the olivine to be larger than your grain size, which would help promote it to stay on the coastline, because basically what happens then is you have sediment sorting. So the larger olivine grains will sink below your natural or your fill material. And in this case, that's detrimental to the carbon removal process, because it effectively removes it from the active layer where you have that olivine interacting with the water and the CO2. So in order to get that dual benefit of removing CO2 from the atmosphere, it has to stay mixed in. And so if it's too big, it'll sink down. So.
Are you currently putting it on the beach somewhere in the world? Is there an ongoing project right now?
Yeah, so we have a pilot trial going on in the Caribbean. So that's already in progress. And as Brian said, we are at the negotiation stage with places like the city of Miami and Hamptons, New York.
What's the availability of the product?
Did you say what's the availability of the product?
Yes.
Yeah, so the olivine market to date, at least olivine sand, is about 10 million tons. Like Grace mentioned, olivine is one of the most common minerals on the planet. There's more olivine, to put it in context, than coal. The reason that it's only 10 million tons a year is there's not a whole lot of uses for it, which is in some ways good, because it means the price can be lower because there's so much of it around. It's not like diamonds. It's incredibly common. I'm currently living on the island of Hawaii, which is made up by weight of about 30% olivine and has some of the most abundant olivine beaches in the world. And so we're not going to have a problem getting you the olivine. In fact, the existing mining companies are willing to donate very large amounts of this material because for them, it's the largest market opportunity ever. It could 100x the amount of olivine used globally. So there's a lot of industry support in dollars that we can tap into here.
Can you put it down individually without having a nourishment project?
That's a great question. It's something that, kind of like a doctor can't write you a prescription until, seeing you. We would really have to understand where you might want it, make sure we're scoping it out to our standards, but it's not out of the realm of possibility to imagine that in a few decades, the percentage of olivine might be a lot higher as we learn more about how your coastline works and we have a higher amount of confidence. Our approach is we don't want to roll this technology out too fast. We want to be very rigorous and methodical and increasing the percentage of olivine incrementally rather than starting at, say, 25% or 50%. That being said, I think we would be interested if the town has interest in it, regardless of if we can fit into your existing nourishment project. Maybe we could scope out a small test beach if, Grace, that's something that you think would be of scientific value.
Yeah, absolutely.
Regarding the mining of olivine, has that been sufficiently studied for the environmental impact of just the mining process?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So one of the reasons why we chose Sibelco to work with first is this is a mine based in Norway that has extremely high environmental standards. They use hydroelectric power for the mining process, which reduces the amount of carbon that's needed. And it's a very established mine right by a port. And so what that means is we don't have to burn carbon to transport it by truck or rail. They can immediately put it on a ship, which right now is the most efficient carbon way to transport large amounts of material and then bring it directly to wherever you need it, either through a port or offshore in a borrow pit. But we're very thoughtful about that, and we're glad that you are too.
I have a question about the scale. When I think of Miami Beach, and then I think of ducks, 1.6 miles of nourishment currently, I'm just curious why you're interested in us.
Well, a lot of reasons. So one, I grew up in North Carolina, and duck in the Outer Banks has one of the longest histories of beach nourishment. So there's a lot of data there, which is important to us. So we can look at that historical data, and it allows us to better predict what will happen from a sediment transport standpoint when we put olivine there. Additionally, North Carolina, other than Washington, is the only state in the US that has, I believe it's around 490 million tons of olivine reserves that we know of. So what we're looking for an ideal location to do this is somewhere that has olivine close to a coast that needs sand. And I think you're a perfect fit for that based on our initial analysis.
That's exciting for us, but when you say that duck has a long history of nourishment, what about Wilmington and all the other ones that had the federal projects? Because we haven't benefited from that. We've been totally self-sustained beach nourishment, starting with Nag's Head project in 2012. So we're kind of new to the game.
My understanding is that your need is quite high. And so we often look for someone that really has a deep need and wants us there. But the vision is not just to focus on duck. We're really looking at the entire East Coast as a way to potentially remove a significant amount of carbon that's been emitted by the entire world if this is successful. But we think that, given the ability to develop personal relationships, I'm happy to fly out and meet everyone in person. My parents still live in North Carolina. It's a really good place to start. And sometimes there's real advantages to working with a smaller government.
Great. Well, thank you for that.
What do all the permitting agencies like the Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Ocean Management, what is their perspective on this?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're actually in an ongoing dialogue of figuring out what's the best way to do education. So we've heard very different things from very different people, from this is not going to be a problem at all, of, hey, we don't understand this, we need to learn more. And I can let, Ken, if he wants, talk to some of the recent exchanges. But one of the things we're still figuring out is, how do we communicate this in a way to regulators? We feel confident in the process, but there's still a process of how do we communicate this. And that's why the first step in our process is making sure that we have local government support, because it's going to take a few times to figure this out. It's new. And, you know how regulators work. They'll tell you no a couple times, and they'll ask you to go get more information and bring it back. So I would defer to Ken's expertise if he wants to share what we're hearing so far. But it's an iterative process, and it's not, there's no magic pill. It's not going to be easy. So we'll have to work together.
Going back to a question Monica asked, assuming that you can't basically participate in our renourishment, which is going to be ongoing next year, why would you want to pick duck, which would probably be another 4 or 5 years old?
These are long-term relationships. We're in this for the long haul, and there's no time but the present to say, hi, hello, I'm Brian, and this is Grace, and we're interested in helping reduce taxpayer burden with some pre-sand in the future. There also may be an opportunity in the short term, as it was mentioned, to do a separate, pure olivine beach experiment, which we would love to pursue with you if there is curiosity and interest on your side. And if not, no worries. That's cool.
This is exciting, I think. I think it's super exciting.
Going back to your summary slide, I think that, council and town staff would be interested in something like this, but I'm not sure what commitment we could give you today.
Yeah. Even saying something like that by email is really useful for us. It allows us to continue to raise more resources that we can use to continue to fund experiments that may be of benefit to you. So if you want, circle up, and if you want to just send us an email affirming that, that is a great starting point. There's really no commitment needed on your side. A big part of what we do is also showing, our donors and investors that towns want this, and we're not pushing it on you, that it's really being pulled from us. So that would be of value, and you wouldn't have to have any sort of commitment, just an email, and we could go from there.
Well, internally, I would suggest council kind of have counsel with our town manager and our coastal engineer before we commit to anything.
Yeah,
So if you want to agree with that, this is all basically brand new to us, so it's kind of hard to make a commitment on the spot.
Please, and that's not what I'm asking. So if you have no more questions, we're happy to give you your remaining time back, and don't hesitate to reach out. Would you like us to send over that sand sample in the meantime?
Yeah.
Yes, certainly.
Okay, great. Looking forward to it.
Very
Well,
nice.
thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All
Any
right,
other
be well.
questions?
Yeah, just to follow up a little bit of that, Drew and I have had a couple of phone calls with them, and in the in the coastal engineering realm, we've seen some snake oil salesmen come and go, promising the world, and when they give the pitch, you're like, this is too good to be true. But as we walk through things and ask them some pretty good questions, I don't see the downside of this. A lot of things you see it right away. This is the downside, but I think right now, sort of taking these baby steps through, what we've basically told them is that if you all are interested, well, rule number one is nothing we do can derail the current track that we're on to get this project built in 2022. And they're very comfortable with that perspective. And then what we said is, if we can do that, we would be happy to sort of use our relationships with the regulatory agencies and our understanding of how the process works to set up some interagency meetings where we can bring the regulatory and the resource agencies together, let them give a pitch like that, or maybe a little bit more scientific, and let these regulatory agencies ask them, or to, poke holes in the story, or ask them, tell them what they would need to be able to agree to actually put this down. But my understanding is that we're still sort of in an experimental phase. I actually spoke to one of the other consultants they're working with up in the Hamptons. She had mentioned And he's, he's on board with it. He thinks that this could be a really good thing. He's kind of doing the same thing. They've got a couple of test projects that they're working through the permitting process to try to get approval to put maybe 2,000 tons of this stuff, which is, 1,000 cubic yards or something like that, fairly small amounts into certain areas. And the way that Brian and Grace explained it to us was that, they feel, I asked, I'm like, with all this vaccine discussion, I'm like, are we like rats that you're testing it on? Or are we like human trials? And she's like, no, you guys are human trials. Like, we've tested this in the lab. It does what it's supposed to do. But now they want to refine the science. They've got some places in the Caribbean they're trying to put it. They want to put it in North Carolina somewhere. They're putting it up in the Northeast just so they can see how different temperatures and wave environments and salinities, if they can refine the science to really like some of those ideas of predicting the grain size, because it is, the material is slightly heavier than sand. So if you put out the same grain size, would it just settle under and you get that layering effect where it was just covered up, after your first application? That's the stuff that they want to learn. And, in the very beginning, I don't think it's going to be a significant, cost deferment in terms of the volume. But if they can get things worked out, that's why he stresses long relationships, because there's still work to be done. But if they can establish this, that it does work and get the right people on board, well, then it could be a real viable supplement to sand sources in the future. So that's my understanding of it. And like I said, we're just looking for the, where's the pitfall? And, I haven't seen one yet. So we're just kind of walking down that road with them to see if we can help.
It is nice to see a project north of us too, because, when you think Caribbean and Miami, you're thinking warm and not a lot of volatility, but
Right.
You sure get that here and you get it in the Hamptons.
Right. So, all right. Well, let's jump back into some of these numbers. So what we've done today is we've put together. Okay. All right. Great. We put together a couple of options. So that first option is the number that we had just talked about. And the third option down there is essentially doing specifically what was called for in the beach maintenance plan. And so I was talking to you last time that these numbers aren't necessarily linear. You can't plug it in and just go with that volume or multiply it by a specific cubic yards, because all these projects are tied to the other projects. But we have gone through that process of putting it into this larger spreadsheet and coming up with estimates for each one of these options. And so number one would be sort of like that Cadillac plan of building all the design back, all of the assumed erosion. Number two would essentially say, okay, we're going to reset the design, and what the beach looks like today is going to be our new design. And we're going to try to maintain this condition of where we are today. We're going to assume that we're going to lose another 94,000 cubic yards between now and the start of the project. And then during the project, we're going to try to make up that 94,000 we lose over the next year and add 5 times that volume during the project. So it'd be 6 times that volume. And then build the taper, which is why that number doesn't exactly work out to 94,200 times 6. But that would be option number two, putting a little under 600,000 cubic yards out there, essentially trying to hold the line of what the beach condition is today. And then the third option would say, hey, this is what we planned for. This is what we budgeted for. We're going to stick with this. And essentially at the end of the day, the beach design, if you will probably be a little less than when we actually start construction of the project next year. And so what we did last night, had a really good call with Drew at the end of the day yesterday, and we had formulated this a little bit differently, and he gave us some really good constructive feedback, and we were able to kind of change this around late last night. But essentially, this is a curve that we show when we talk to you all about our monitoring data. And what you have over here on the left side is some starting point. So we first started monitoring the beaches at Duck in 2013. And so if you take that as your starting point, that's your zero sum of volume. And what I want you to mostly focus on is the green line, which is the project area. So between 2013 and 2017, when we built the project, We lost a little bit of volume, gained a little bit of volume. It was a little bit stable. And then when we built that project in 2017, we added all of this volume, over, a little over 1 million cubic yards of sand. And then each one of these points is one of the surveys that we've conducted since the project was completed. This bump here is actually the losses from Dorian, and then it shows that there was some natural rebound from Dorian as well. But essentially, this point in 2018 to this point in 2021 represents that erosion rate that we keep talking about. But this shows you in relationship to where you started before the project was built, that you've got a little bit less than 600,000 cubic yards on the beach today, or in April when we did the survey, that was not there in January or in 2017 when the project was built. And so building off of this idea of this curve and following these cumulative volumes, what we've done is we've projected what these different projects would look like if we were to build them, okay? And so projects like Wrightsville Beach and Carolina Beach and some of the Virginia Beach projects, which we do some monitoring for the Virginia Beach projects, you could see a chart like this over a 20-year period, and you'd see 4 different renourishment events in there. And you'd see the volume kind of slough off, and then it bumps up, and then it sloughs off a little bit, and then it bumps up. So this is pretty typical, but what we're showing is in blue, this would be that sort of, top of the line option 1, where you're rebuilding the design and you're putting enough volume out there to deal with erosion. And so that black line represents what the design volume, what the original design volume was. If you're above that black line, then you're in excess of what the design volume is. If you're below that, then you're less than what that original design was. And you can see over on the left how the actual project, after the first couple years, it was still just above the design. After Dorian, it fell, and then that rebound, we were pretty close to the design, and now in 2021 we are below that design, which is where we come up with that. We've lost about 200,000 cubic yards from the design. But that's option 1. This would be option 2. So option 2, like I said, essentially fixes the condition of the beach in April 2021 and says this is the new design volume that we want to try to maintain. So we know we're anticipating losing this volume. We're going to add all that volume, and then we're looking at the red line essentially. And at the end of the next nourishment interval, if this curve works out, we would have the same amount of volume as what we measured last month or in April. And then the third option, option 3, just putting back the budgeted amount. What I mainly want to, you kind of understand the trend now, but what I want to point out to you is that this would be the anticipated point of what the beach looks like a year from now when we go to construction. And what this is showing is that you're probably losing a little bit of ground over the next 5 years, that after 5 years, putting that 424,000 cubic yards out there probably doesn't quite hold the line of where you will be when the project is built. You're going to be a little bit less. The other thing that I'd point out on here is that if you look over here on the left-hand side, that highest line, that option number 1, the design volume appears to be just under 800,000 cubic yards. If we look at option number 2, essentially we're decreasing the design volume by about 25%. We're going from about 800 down to about 600. So we're looking at a little around a 25% decrease in that design. Well, so what is the magic of that design, you ask? Well, when we first got into this, we picked that Isabel storm as a design storm that we felt the town had the ability to, it was really driven somewhat budgetarily. We said that the town, could the town provide protection for a 5-year storm or a 10-year or a 50-year storm or a 100-year storm? We looked at all these simulated storms. We say the numbers match pretty well with this Isabel storm. It's about a 20-year design storm. It's something that people that have been up here for a while can wrap their head around. Why don't we shoot for that? And so essentially we'd be stepping that down a little bit. Maybe we're not providing the design level for the Isabel storm at the end of 5 years, but for most of the cycle, for a couple of years in the cycle at least, year 1, year 2, year 3, you are still above that original design, that Isabel storm. So, kind of talking this through and thinking more about this last night, and then this is just that summary slide again, showing those 3 options. I mean, given that everyone has financial limitations, I think that option number 2 or something in that range is a viable option to consider. That yes, erosion rates have shown themselves to be higher than we had originally anticipated. We are doing some things with the fill configuration to try to improve that. But we want to be conservative in how we think that's going to turn out over the next 5 years. And so we're gonna shoot for this. If our project, now that we're looking at a higher erosion rate, we're anticipating that if that option number 2 outperforms our expectations, well then, the next cycle we can start stepping our volume, trying to get back up to that original design volume. But I think that's a good way of sort of looking at it. And there's nothing magic about those 3 numbers. If there's a number somewhere in between those, we can kind of take a look at that as well. But I think that's a good way for you all to kind of visualize that. The next topic I wanted to get into had to do with borrow areas, because we're going through some situations right now with the agencies that I just want you guys all to be aware of. But if you want to stop and talk about sand volumes, this is probably a good time to do it. And then I can brief you on those next couple of slides.
I have a question that's pulling us back a little bit to the entire town. If you wouldn't mind going back to that slide that showed the different areas and the sand volume loss in the whole town of Duck. I guess my question is, I know we've been, as a town, having you monitor the entire beach. And, you do hear folks trying to understand how this project relates to them if they're not in the project area. So that being said, my question is simply, without getting into too much detail, we are obviously monitoring the sand in the entire town. And we know in the project area that the rate was assumed to be 6 feet a year, but now it's 12. Are you doing those same kind of projections for loss in the other areas? And are they different from what you've decided? Are you taking it to that step with those others, or just simply monitoring?
Sure. And so these lines, the blue and kind of teal lines, show the same thing. Essentially, it starts with the existing volume. So it's a relative volume. It starts the period in time in June 2013 or July 2013, summer of 2013. And then what it shows is in that northern area, there was actually some erosion over that first year into 15. Some of that had rebounded by the time the project was constructed. But since the project was constructed, if you took this as sort of the 0 point in that first survey after the project, December 2017, the northern section has actually gained sand. The southern section was on a similar trend. It looks like right after the project, there was some loss, which was primarily concentrated up around the FRF. But since that time, up to 2020, we had been seeing increase in the volume of the southern section, south of the FRF pier. However, similarly to what we saw in the project area, we saw some pretty high volume losses in that southern section of the town over the last year. And this is something that I'm probably not prepared to fully discuss. I mean, we're writing up this monitoring report now, but those are the numbers, the same way we've computed that green number. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, over the last year, we have seen sort of a shift in that trend in the southern section. I don't know if that's all concentrated in a couple of profiles that's driving it, or if it truly is over the whole area. That's something that we'll talk a lot about in the monitoring report when it comes out.
Okay. And that's going to come out in the winter?
Correct. Yeah, probably sometime in the late fall, we can come back up and present that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but as far as the rest of the town, that's kind of, we had seen this trend of both the north and the south look like it was benefiting, but for whatever reason, we're seeing some high losses in that southern part in the last year.
Ken, can you move forward to that chart right there?
Yep.
So I know this is all modeling and you've actually extrapolated from this year to next year. But if in fact we either accrete or stay the same, then all those options change and we basically are putting back the design beach, correct? In other words, if we stayed at the 600,000 and we put the 484 on there, we've basically achieved our design beach. And of course, and also your extrapolation of future years, you never show any accretion or any gain anywhere, correct?
Correct. We're showing, we're assuming that 12 cubic yard per linear foot rate in all of those predictions moving forward. But yeah, I mean, if any of those periods improve themselves, even that period that's going between, the start of the construction or now and the start of the construction, I mean, if that improves, and we don't see that steep drop off that we've seen over the last year, you're at a higher starting place. You could essentially design to put the same volume to try to hit this same mark in the construction, which would mean your project volume decreases.
Sure.
Or you go a little bit higher than that. There are a lot of variables that are going into this,
sure.
and we're just trying to get your feedback so that we can best plan.
I mean, if you look at the accretion in 2019, if that happened again, puts us way ahead of the game.
Correct. Yeah, it wouldn't take much to at least where we're anticipating it being at the start of the project. It wouldn't take much to at least be able to hold that line from the 424. But right now we're trying to play this on the the conservative side. We've seen those rates fluctuate from year to year. Some years have been good, some years have been higher, and we're trying to be pretty conservative with that. Don't want to see through rose-colored glasses and under predict.
Think you can move on now, probably.
All right, so real quick, you guys are pretty familiar with the borrow area. I want to focus your attention on this borrow area A. This is where the remaining sand will come from. Part of the project that was built in 2017 did come from this borrow area C, but that was used up. But one of the things that that we have gotten some pushback with the Division of Coastal Management is that they have some rules where, and you can imagine if you were to go out and dig a channel, in navigation channel, and then 5 years later or 2 years later, you wanted to go out and dig that channel out again and put that material on the beach, you might want to make sure that the material that filled that channel was still beach compatible material. Even though the first time you dug it out, it was beach compatible, you may want to verify that that's compatible. And so there are rules that say in these navigation channels where even where the conditions are sort of known, that you do have to sample once, dig the channel out, sample again, and if the samples come back the second time, then multiple events after that, you don't have to continue to resample. There are some rules like that in the offshore as well, where if you can imagine, the ground out there is flat and you were to dig a pit in the ground, and then some material came by that was migrating, on the shelf out there. If it filled in, if you went back and did surveys that showed the volume has increased, well, are you sure of the volume that's in there? And so they asked us when we first submitted our permit application if we were going to go back and dredge any of the areas that had previously been dredged. And we said, well, yeah, there are areas that previously were dredged. We want to take advantage of as much volume that's out there as possible. And they said, well, do you know that if it's changed, has it filled in? And so one of the things that we've been discussing with them is that this is essentially a series of shoals out there. We're not dealing with a pit or a channel that was dug. We're dealing with a shoal system out there. And this first slide sort of shows context with how regional this feature that we're actually looking at is. And if we go to another figure that was in the borrow area, you can see that even within that smaller subset that I just shown, which is this green area, what we concentrated on was the highest points on that much larger regional feature that was out there. And that's what we turned into the borrow area. And so this is a survey, or this is a map showing the bathymetry, the actual water depths out there throughout the borrow area. And this is one of the areas you can actually see if it's zoomed in. These are the areas, some of these places you can see where the dredge tracks were. This is where they took the most amount of sand out of this cut, but they dredged this portion of the borrow area, this portion of the borrow area, and a portion of this area as well, and left these other two and this one down here untouched. All of those blue dots are vibrocores that were taken the very first time we went out there and determined what was in the borrow area. And so The agency said, well, we think you should take VibraCores over the whole borrow area again to make sure of this. And we're like, well, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars to redo this based on the, the morphology of these features out there. We don't think it's warranted. How about we do a new survey to show whether or not there's any infilling of this area? So we conducted a new survey that was done back at the end of May. It was completed. And it's a different color scale. I apologize. I couldn't get the graphics guys to put two of the same together. That would make it a little easier to contrast. But this graphic they did put together for us that contrasted. So everywhere in that map where you see blue are areas where the elevation has actually come up. So if you can think of like infilling, but it's areas where the elevation is not as deep as it was. And in red, it's areas where it's actually lower over this 4-year period. So there clearly have been changes out there to this shoal system, and we've gone back in and we've recomputed all of the volumes, and essentially the borrow area has about 12 million cubic yards of sand out in there. There's about 200,000 cubic yards less in that specific shape than there was back in 2017. Some of those boxes have more sand, some of those boxes have less sand, but essentially the sand doesn't stay perfectly stable. And so when we showed this graphic to the agencies, they said, well, you have areas out there that have filled in 3 or 4 feet. How do you know that material is compatible? And we said, well, it hasn't. It's not that it's filled in, it's that these shoals are literally moving around. They're not stationary. And so we showed them a couple of cross sections that were taken along these lines. And I'll just kind of walk through these with you a little bit. But if you can follow this slide, the red line is essentially what it looked like before there was any dredging. The green line is what it looked like right after the dredging, and the blue line is what it looked like last month. And so over here in this shoal feature, you can kind of see how the edge of this shoal has migrated from the position where it was in green to the position it was in blue, which is essentially the shoal is moving south. And then on this side, you can see the same thing. The blue is sticking out a little bit further than the green. It's a little hard to see. This is the longest cross section, but if we zoom into the shortest cross section, try to put a couple of visuals in here. And so what this line that I just drew on the screen, showing that this blue cross section is a little bit further to the right than the green one. And you're not necessarily seeing like a depression. What you see up here, you see, a little bit of sand filling in this small depression. That might be a foot of sand or 1.5 feet, 2 feet of sand. But where they're seeing those blue colors, what they're seeing is the movement of that shoal. They're seeing that, well, this vertical line intersects the blue line here, but it intersects the green line down here. So if you just put it into a computer program, you'd say, oh, well, there's 4 feet of infilling there. But it's not infilling, it's migration of this shoal material. And we've taken, 50 VibraCores out there inside of this area. We've got very tight understanding of the material out there. So we had a couple of conversations last week with the agencies. They said, look, you make a compelling case. If you want to go ahead and submit all your information to us, we'll consider this. We think that maybe there's some flexibility in the rules. If you guys are going to sign off on this and you're absolutely certain of the material, then you'll take it on your credentials and you'll sign for that. Well, we made some phone calls. We called around, and there's actually a VibraCoring contractor working for Nags Head right now up here in the Outer Banks, and we were able to negotiate a contract that they're going to go out there. They're actually out there today. They're going to take 5 more cores in the borrow site to verify that those areas that the agencies were concerned with. This map basically shows anywhere where the computer program tells us there's been more than 2 feet of change. And so we're going to take 5 VibraCores in that area out there. Should have that information next week. Like I said, we think that we could have made the case to the agencies without it, but given the contractor was already on site and we're splitting the cost with 4 other towns, it was essentially a little less than $7,000 per town to collect this additional data. And I think this should be sort of the nail in the coffin to this issue, to be able to show them that, beyond a reasonable doubt, the material out there is compatible. So we're moving really fast with this. This probably wasn't the best timing of when they could have given us this news to try to hit this middle of July timeframe that we're on. Might push that schedule a week or two, but we got our folks ready to jump on these things next week when we get the data and provide that to DCM. And we've been coordinating that with them. They're expecting this information. They understand what's going on. So that's all I wanted to talk to you about with the borrow area. It did have a potential of costing a few more bucks and potentially pushing the schedule a little bit, but I did want to keep you all updated on that. So the schedule hasn't changed since the last time I presented to you. Everything up there is as we saw the last time. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
And,
Yes, sir.
and you get the 4 towns that you're working with, then you got NAGSTED. Is NAGSTED trying to get any of the sand that we're looking at?
No, they don't use that borrow area. I can actually show you in that very first, they're using that borrow area down here that's a little closer to the town. It almost looks like geologically this is kind of an extension of that shoal moving out there, but their sand source is a little bit closer to shore right off of NAGSTED. But I think they have plenty of sand in there before they come looking for additional sand.
But do we own A, B, and C? Do we have the rights to that, or is NAGSTED to go in there and say, hey, we got sand in A, and can they go in there and take that?
They could, and it all comes down to dollars. If at some point in time, A becomes the cheapest sand for them, they have just as much of a right as Kill Double Hills or Duck or anybody else on the Outer Banks to go out there and try to permit that borrow site.
We may have to go to their site too.
We could try to go to their site. Their site, even though it's closer to shore, it's still a little bit further trek to get it.
Yeah,
So
but
that's
if
why
we deny A, we could possibly have to go down to near their site to get sand also.
it would probably delay, it would delay the project to some extent for sure. But there are options. But to try to do that kind of coordination at this point in time would probably push us.
Thanks.
On that borrow area, I believe you said for borrow area A, there originally was 12 million cubic yards. And when we borrowed it, we took 200,000 out.
No, there was originally around 16 million.
Okay.
And so the first project took about 4 of that. We were down to about 12. I think it's 12. Actually, I think I might have had So
12.8.
12.8 is what it was at the end of the 2017 project. 12,560 is what the new data shows. So it's about 250, 270,000.
Thank you for explaining that. I wasn't sure what the difference. Thank
Sure.
you. I know we're going to run out at some point too.
Getting olivines.
That much, yeah, that much you've taught us over the last 5 years, and this is not an unknown, people don't get that.
One of the things that we've seen it's always going to be finite. Even if you had 50 million, you can only project that out so far. But one of the things that we have seen as we've dug deeper, pardon the pun, dug deeper into the data for the borrow area is that there are some areas that we could probably go a little bit deeper, but we would need some longer cores to do it. So I think there's room to expand this borrow area, both laterally and deeper in the future for future projects. And then there are some other ideas and pieces of information that we have that say maybe some other sites could be investigated as well.
And it just would cost more.
Correct. There would need to be additional investigations to confirm the compatibility and all of that, right?
I appreciate you bringing it down to our level.
Happy to. All right. Any other questions?
Thank you, Ken.
Sure.
Any other questions? That's a big question.
So he's talked about sand. I'm going to talk about money. I'm sure you want to know about that too. First, just some visualization for you. So this, staff pulled some photographs. This was right after the 2017 Nourishment project. So that's what the beach looked like after that. North Point, that's what it looked like last summer. So you can start to see a little bit of escarpment happening there. Obviously some erosion. And then May of this year, and that's the same place, North Point. So you can see the beach is narrowed up. Definitely you're seeing that erosion happen. I just wanted to put those images in your head. Ken's got a lot of really good data, and graphs are impressive and stuff, but pictures, I think, help explain it as well. And speaking of graphs, so money. Ken has laid out really 3 options. So option 3 that we're showing there is build the project as we've been discussing. So the maintenance plan. So that $8 million roughly project. It runs out to be about $545,000 a year in debt service. That's the constant. So that's what you see in the orange bar. And then as you add additional debt service, that's the blue. So option 2 that he talked to you about, and then option 3. So I put also on there our current debt service is about 1.4 million. So obviously option 1 puts us significantly ahead of your current debt service load on which your MSD rates have all been calculated. So this is the beach fund revenue and expenditures. Again, the 3 different options. Option 1, which is the higher volume of sand. Option 2 is the middle of the road. Option 3 being the current project as it's been discussed. And you can see what that does year over year, revenue versus expenditures. So you can see in fiscal 23, your debt service comes in, and also calculated in fiscal 23 is the debt service on the FEMA. So we're going to have to, remember, have to borrow money in anticipation of the FEMA grant. So that's included in that fiscal 23 debt service projection. So what you can see then is revenue and expenditures. Obviously in the orange, you're spending a lot more money than you're bringing in. With the blue, which is the option 2, the middle of the road, you're doing pretty well. You're bringing in just a little bit more than you're putting out, other than in the 5th year out, which is basically the year we're in right now. So this fiscal 22 that we're coming into, we're going to be spending a little more money in engineering and so on to get ready for the project. So the same thing will happen in fiscal 27. And then option 1, what happens if you leave your revenue where it is? Your debt service basically is dropped by half in round numbers. So you're actually going to be building your fund balance. So when you get 5 years down the road, your beach fund balance, this is not unrestricted general fund money, this is beach fund money. Your next cycle, you're looking again at a lower debt service because you're going to be able to pay cash for some of your re-nourishment in 5 years.
Oh, I see.
This is what the beach fund, this is just I said to Ken this morning, it's a little bit more sophisticated than back of the napkin, but we're not down into the decimal points, but just to give you an idea of what the beach fund looks like. Again, in the blue, which is that middle of the road, which is very similar to what we're paying now in debt service, just a little bit less. You are maintaining a reserve in your beach fund. Obviously in the green, which is the current project, and you're building that reserve up so you can pay cash for part of your project in 2027. The unknowns in 2027 are the grants that we're getting now. So we don't know in 2027, will there be any state money? Will there be county money? Or how much county money will there be to help offset the costs? So that's worth thinking about as you're considering what to do this year, is how you want your out years to look in terms of your cash reserves. And then again, the Cadillac, as Ken alluded to, that first option, you've depleted your reserves. So really, if you go with option 1 during this coming year, we're going to be talking about what you want to do with your MSD rates, because they're going to have to be adjusted.
Question I have is why are we showing option 1 and 2 in 1920, 2021? I don't quite understand what that historical couple of first bars are doing for us here.
That's just it. That's the beach fund as it was. So it's unaffected. So basically all of them are the same. It's unaffected by anything in the future.
Just a starting point.
Okay. So it's sort of where we are.
It's the, it's the,
Right,
so it's right
okay.
where we are today. And then
Thank
you
you. So
start
you
adding
just-
in change when you get
Okay.
into fiscal 23.
Okay, thank you. And then, of course, the green and the blue, everything is based on an assumption for the next 5 years that we don't change the MSD rate and we collect the same amount of money
Correct.
that we've been collecting.
Right.
And I know this is a stupid question, but I'm going to just spit it out. So I'm sorry, but when we went to revenue neutral, changing our tax, which meant no additional tax for any of our residents, regular ad valorem, how did we adjust the MSD rate? Do we leave it revenue neutral or did we go down? I need to remember that, and I'm sorry that I don't, but I'd like the public to remember it with me.
It went to revenue neutral. We took it to revenue neutral, and into the new budget, it's at revenue neutral, same rate.
So
So we did take
essentially,
it down,
the folks in the MSD areas have been paying the same thing since we started.
in essence, yes.
Okay. That's what I thought so, but I just wanted to make sure I was super clear on that. And this projection keeps that trend going. So everything the same. Because way back when we started this, we thought we could, reduce the MSD rate after we paid for the last, for the first 5 years. We did not do that. We kept it revenue neutral. No one's paying any more. Ad valorem tax stayed the same. MSD rates have stayed the same, based on waiting for what we were going to find out, which now we found out it's going to cost a lot more. Okay, thanks for letting me recap that.
The only thing that changes in revenue assumption in this is a little bit of a change in assessed value so that it's like 0.5%, whatever we use in the budget. Some escalation in sales tax revenue because 20% of the sales tax revenue is restricted, goes into the beach fund. That's built into this as well.
Okay, thank you.
And so if we look at history, and I think I went through this last month, but basically the project cost us almost 15 million to do. We projected maintenance at 5 million. Dorian added another close to 3 million, which takes us to 8 million. But FEMA's reimbursing us for that. The state was lucky enough to give us a grant, but there's no future in that. So basically, and our objectives were to save property, basically with the dunes and put a beach back in place, which we still have not lost any property. We haven't lost any pools. We still have a pretty significant dune with the exception of escarpment. So basically, option number 3 puts us back to where we were in 2017. And we don't know if we'll get that decrease or increase in sand over the next 12 months. But we can basically, maintain the rate, build a reserve, and we know we'll need renourishment probably in 4 or 5 years and perhaps more nourishment. So we're going to have a capital fund that's going to build, if we keep the tax rate the same, build significantly, as you said, Drew, therefore offsetting a lot of that cost that, may not be available from other sources in the future. The other thing is, from that beach nourishment fund, even though we're collecting money every year through occupancy tax, there's now 7 beaches contending for it, no longer just a couple. And that all 5 coastal towns and Avon and Buxton are all contending for it. And who knows who else might enter in over the next couple of years. So that even could limit what the contribution would be from the county. In fact, there's no guarantee from the county for future years either, even though they guaranteed $2.5 million on this project. So building that reserve, I think, is important.
Well, just to be clear on that, the reserve, if we build a reserve, will only be good for the nourishment area. You can't use it in any other place. So it's a reserve that would only do the 1.6 existing project. We could never spend that money on a different project.
Correct.
Just to make that crystal clear.
So Drew, what we need to do is, as a council, make a decision today on option 1, 2, or 3, so we can go forward with the coastal engineer plan and permitting.
Yes. See, Mr. Wilson needs some direction. You need that today.
So council, I guess you all need to weigh in on option 1, 2, or 3 with respect to your feelings and you think how we should move forward. Anybody can start.
I'll start. I think we should leave it how it is, and just go back to what we started with and see what happens in 5 years.
So you're saying option 1, I mean, option 3. And can you elaborate on that decision, Sandy?
Just, right now, we had that big storm that did a lot of damage. Next 5 years, we may not have a storm that does that damage, and we'll be back to where we should have been now.
The 12 foot a year doesn't concern you, average?
It does right now, but what says that it's going to keep happening? I know Ken says it will. We also thought it was only going to be 6. I'm willing to gamble that it's going to stay the same. We put back what we had and hope in 5 years that we just do a small nourishment job again, like we should have been doing now.
I mean, I see the advantage of that from a fiscal standpoint because the town is not covering and carrying as much debt. We've, as the mayor said, been able to protect the property, and that was a really, really scary time for us when when houses and pools and things were just being completely threatened. I'm just concerned that we have this data now, and it's really like, what do we consider good enough protection? To me, I'm not 100% convinced that the option 3 is the right way to go. I would be more inclined at this minute to go with option 2 or some portion of it, only because what it's doing in option 2 is it's improving the design beach. It's not replicating the design beach, but it's making it so we have more resiliency. I gotta believe that things are only going to get worse. I mean, let's just look around and see that things aren't, and maybe 5 years we're okay. It's a gamble. It's a long-term problem that we're facing. So we're, gambling with the 5-year time. I don't object to having, a reserve fund for the community that is putting their money into this fund. I don't really think that there's an appetite for higher taxation for that MSD area. So I don't have a complete decision quite yet. I'd love to hear from other council members on this.
After Ken's presentation 2 weeks ago, I was fairly certain that I wanted to stay status quo because I felt like the project had met its goals. And while the projections could be bad, it seemed that if we stayed status quo, we could be funding a project that's sufficient. Now looking at, this additional information where it shows sort of the impacts out, and you look at 1, 2, and 3, I'm more in favor of 3 now because I think building a fund, building the reserves, puts us in a better position if 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road, 5 years down the road, it's been insufficient, we will have reserves. If we're not insufficient, if actually the trends improve or it stay the same, then I agree with you. I don't think that there's an appetite for increasing the MSD rate. Perhaps it could even be decreased down the road. But, I'm more in favor of doing a status quo, trying to maintain the project and its goals and the preservation of property, the maintenance of a good beach, and all that brings to the community, and not get in the hole and build So I'm more convinced today on status quo project. I appreciate option 2, but it's quite a bit of, that slide isn't up, but there's quite a bit of difference between the reserves that could be built going 1 versus 2. It's kind of where I'm sitting right now.
You mean 2
2 versus 3, sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess the question, and I don't want to.
What is the difference in what can be built between the two,
Let's hear.
between 2 and 3?
As far as the amount of sand,
No, the reserves, the money.
so
Isn't it
the-
on this
quite a
bar
bit.
chart?
Right. So the debt service, it would about double
Mhm.
between those two. So
When
you're
you say
really,
the
really
debts-
looking,
the
you're
debt
really looking
service-
at so under option 2, it looks a lot like it does today. So that fund stays about static. Whereas that other option, you're looking at, as opposed to just a little under or a little over 1.5 million, you're over 4 when you get out into the 5th year.
I mean, option, if you keep the rates, it's almost too much, to have, I mean, in my mind. If you're, here's the question too, that let me get. If we had another FEMA reimbursement, it's based on the volume of sand lost, like they calculated that. So they don't care what your design beach was to begin with, because they're just looking at, hey, you lost this much sand and that's how much this costs and that's how much we're going to reimburse you. So that's another thought. But anyway.
Yeah, I don't think we should be concerned about too much, because by the time this comes around again in 5 years, the cost of the project is going to go up between now and then. So being prepared to do that with more money in the fund, I think is a smart thing to do.
And, obviously year to year, as a council decides what their budget is and what their budget ordinance looks like, if you want to adjust MSD rates down, that's always an option. If the appetite isn't there to have a reserve, or the projections are the reserve is to your comfort level, we can calculate what that MSD rate would be to move it in the other direction.
That's what we were going to do after year 5, based on everything we planned. And what the public would need to understand, particularly the public in the MSD area, is that the beach would not be built back to the 2017 project. It would just be built back to what we saw in about where we were. Well, I guess it would be
4.5 years, we'd back to where we
Where
were
we
in
are now.
2017.
where we
Or
were
today.
in 17.
Yeah.
When we started the project. So it is about the same, but with the knowledge that it could erode faster than we expected before. That's what, and it wouldn't cost, and there's no change to the MSD in the foreseeable future if we go with option 3, because we're going to keep the MSD rate the same and build the fund to be ready for whatever happens in 5 years. Because we're not doing this thing in 3 years. We have to go in with the other towns. We can't go it alone. So it's another 5 years, and we don't know what we're going to deal with in 5 years. I mean, I'm saying all that because I think it makes sense. I'm just talking, but we have to do this with the other towns to save the mobilization, I would think.
If you look at that chart, we're having normal erosion off of the original plan, because it's obviously planned to sacrifice much of the sand. And then we started to accrete, and then of course we had the hurricane, which I guess would be that dip from in 19. Other than that, I mean, we were on the normal cycle of what we planned to lose going into renourishment, correct, Ken? I mean, in fact, we even accreted that 1 year. Dorian hit right after that spike, right?
After Dorian, but this really had slowed down. If we wouldn't have ever surveyed that, and we would have just surveyed, in the summer and then the summer again, that would have looked like a pretty low number. One of the, hesitate to give too many options because it just confuses things. But one of the things that Drew and I talked about today was that the scenario that you essentially try to stay, I showed you that option 3 brings you a little lower than what you might end up with if this erosion rate keeps up through over the next year. If we assume the same 94,000, we're going to end up a little less than that. So it's if all these things hold true, you feel like you're losing a little bit of ground over the 5 years. If we bump that volume up to try to assume that this is our starting point, and then we're going to add 5 years of nourishment to this point, and end up basically bring this black line up so that it's equal to this dot. I think that number was like, it was just below $9 million, the project cost, as opposed to these numbers. So it would be about $1 million more than option 3. And then, the other thing that's rolling around as you guys are talking is that when we bid these projects out, the specs allow for us to adjust the volume up or down up to 25% of the volume without the contractor being able to change the unit cost. And so what that would look like is that if we were to better this rate between now and the time the project happens, we could adjust that volume down and still try to stay neutral of whatever we think the erosion rate is going to be out 5 years from the start of the project, and sort of hold the line for the project. But that would, you'd start with sort of this assumption of around a $9 million project. And then based on the performance of the project over the next year, you could move that number up or down if you wanted to. So.
Isn't the initial assumption when you do the nourishment, you're going to lose about 50% over 5 years?
No, because that kind of depends on what the initial volume is. The projects down south are performing a lot better for the most part because they're contiguous. It's like a 6 mile long project. Whereas this one is just that, 1 2/3 or so. So if we were to have only put, if our design was only to place 20 cubic yards a linear foot, and then we put 50 cubic yards on top of that to account for advanced fill, well then you'd lose 70 or 80% of that volume. So it really depends on what your original design is. There's not necessarily a rule of thumb.
Well, on that point, when you compare us to the southern beaches that are having quite a significant slower erosion rate, and in some cases no erosion in Kill Devil Hills, as you mentioned last time we talked, our project was really unique in the fact that we built those dunes, rebuilt the dunes, right? I mean, that is really a lot more sand went into those dunes than anybody else has done.
Correct.
So can you remind me about the design? If we stuck with option 3 or a little better at 9 million, what happens to those dunes? Kind of, again, that's the design. You're going to rebuild those still?
Yeah, the scarps are going to sort of level off. And when you add all of that dry sand beach, for the first 2 or 3 years, you wouldn't expect to see any more, I would assume the town's going to go out and put sand fencing out there. So you probably see some buildup of that dune over the next couple of years with that dry sand beach. But then as the beach got narrower, like those pictures that Drew sent, and in the later part of it, there's the potential that you would scarp back to where you are today, or maybe a little bit more than that or something like that. But in the beginning, when it's this big drop, the project's going to look very similar to that first picture he showed, which is that the dredge just left. You're banking on the fact that most of that sand is going to move out to the offshore part of the profile anyway. But that first season, there's so much sand being blown around that you can catch it with the sand fencing and the vegetation that's already established on the dune. You would expect to see the dune improve quite a bit just naturally without even having to put sand in it.
Ken, with all the plantings that have been done into sand fencing, would that dune is pretty much stabilized, even when we're just putting the sand in front of it. We're going to grow that dune from the fresh sand we're putting on the beach, and that dune will either get wider or higher. Am I correct?
Correct.
So our beach could be, it's like this now, it could be like a lesser angle, am I correct?
The dune would be a little shallower of a slope. Yeah, yeah. Especially in the scarp zones. I mean, you put that sand fence at the base of it and it should fill in there pretty nicely over those first couple of years when you've got all that sand blowing around.
Let's go around council and Nancy, the option pick,
3.
Sandy,
3.
Rob,
2.
Monica,
I see the benefit of doing 3, but I think we need public education on what the public can expect. I see the benefit of not going into I mean, if it's all about the money, then it's 3. I'm a little bit torn, but that I'm not 100% convinced that it's 3. But it sounds like the majority is going with 3. Is that how you feeling? 3?
yeah, Mayor feels, I feel option 3. I think that puts us back where we started. I think it's not putting more burden on the taxpayers. And I think by building a reserve, we always have flexibility with MSDs year in and year out. So if we build a too big a reserve, we feel it's not going to get, the dunes and the beach are not going to degrade as much as they have now. We can always adjust the MSD rates, but I think we'll have more money coming into the next 4 or 5 years for the next renourishment. You also saw the trend line on the south, which is trending up, which says we could have additional issues up and down the beach, not just the 1.9 miles or where we're doing with today. And the other thing is, right now we got 7 beaches doing renourishment, not the original 1 and the original 4. So I say option 3.
Well, since we're talking about all this and we have more than 1.6 miles of beach in this town, I would like to just expand the conversation because, as I mentioned before, this money that we would have in excess would only be for the project area and ever be for the project area. So that's understood. The monitoring that we've done with the town shows us, the whole beach, which I think is a really good service for the town to see, because people are asking, well, what about my beach? What about my beach? And you don't have people in Kitty Hawk asking, what about my beach? Because it's the whole beach. And the northern beaches of Kill Devil Hills, 3 miles are being tended to. So we do have that little bit of a thing that I think this council needs to be thinking of and communicating to the entire town about what about their beach. So the monitoring report will be very important for us. And, down the road in 5 years, if some other area is interested in doing a project, the town needs to be ready to talk to those people about it, is all I'm saying, while we're talking, because this isn't all of Duck. This is a very, piece of it. It needs it, and it's great we did it. And anyway, okay, that's all I wanted to say about that.
Did you select an option or
Oh,
you're withholding your
well, I
opinion?
knew that I knew that it was going to be 3 just based on what I was hearing from you guys. And I don't disagree. It's good to be fiscally conservative. It's good to see where we are in 5 more years. I'm just afraid that the science is saying could be a lot worse. So that's where I'm fearful that we're not doing enough. But we're doing something.
I would just also add that, we're dealing with estimates. We have no idea what the dredge companies are going to say. We have no idea what the cost of sand is going to be, but everything else is escalating. So even though we're talking about, option number 3 could grow just from the standpoint of the bid process. So
That's true.
it does put another level of caution. And this is a year-to-year thing with respect to MSD tax rates. And if we have to expand to another area and the nurse area is doing better, there'll be adjustment in one area and maybe new MSDs in another. But I think each council will have to deal with that year in and year out.
How does the council feel about that option 3.1 with the $9 million? Has anybody got an appetite for that, for a little bit extra sand?
I don't.
No.
Anybody else?
I mean, and can you just explain that 25% variable cost? I mean, I guess that was saying if you got a good deal on sand, you could go up 25%, but I don't think that's happening.
Essentially, I mean, even with the 424,000 that we're talking about, if we went with that number, you could still go up to 25% of that. So well over 100,000 cubic yards if you wanted to be closer to 500,000. Once you saw what the actual unit cost was, your portion of the mobilization, all that, you had fixed costs as opposed to these engineered estimates. You could increase the cost. Of course, you could probably always increase the volume. The dredgers aren't going to mind that, but we could potentially decrease the volume up to 25%, and it wouldn't affect that unit cost. If we told them to reduce the project cost by 50%, then they say, whoa, this is a different situation.
I see
We're
what
going to
you mean.
change our
Okay,
rate.
I remember that.
But you
Okay.
can adjust that.
Okay, so conceivably, you could come back to us with some harder costs of actual costs, and we would have another decision point at that time?
I mean, yeah, I mean, until it's time to sign the contract, even once the contract is signed, if there's a decision made that we want to increase that volume, as long as they've got time in their construction contract and they're willing to do it, you could potentially increase the volume. But we're hoping, even with the borrow area, delays, we're hoping that by the end of August or into early September, that we'll have those fixed costs in hand and we'll be able to make some better decisions.
Ken, did you say the mobilization cost would be the same if we went with the increase of 25%?
Correct. So when we bid these projects out, or when we put them out for bid and the contractors bid on them, there's going to be a list of a table that they're going to have to bid on. They will have to provide us that mobilization cost. And the way that we've defined who pays what is your percentage in cubic yards of sand that you're going to put on your beach based on the total of all 4 towns. So if you're 25% of that volume, then you guys will pay 25% of whatever that mob cost is. And that's what that spread. That's why I was saying it's not always linear if we just start adding volume. But yeah, the mobilization wouldn't change at all. And even the unit cost, if they say, all right, for Town of Duck, every cubic yard we put on the beach, we're going to charge you $10. If you said, all right, well, the bid sheet says that we're going to put 425,000 cubic yards or 424,000 cubic yards on, the project's performed better over the last year. Something happened, we've gained some sand. Now we only want to put 375,000 cubic yards of sand. They can't say, well, now your rate is not $10. Now your rate is $11. They have to hold that $10 rate, whether you go up 25% or down 25% of what they bid on.
Have you ever seen it go down?
Well, it goes, the rate or the
No,
volume? Well, I mean, people have gone down on the volume because the bids came in, 10% higher, so they wanted to keep their budget. They decreased it by 10%.
But not for the amount of sand that they found there.
Right. I mean, looking at that curve, I don't know what we're going to see a year from now, honestly. We've seen it go up, we've seen it go down. So it wouldn't surprise me, I guess is what I'm saying, is if we better that rate over the next year. Typically, if I showed you that rate for Kitty Hawk or Kill Devil Hills, it does, it starts out steep and then it starts to flatten out as you get into that last year. So it wouldn't be uncommon that rate would be a little flatter over the next year.
One question in off of Duck, Southern Shores, North End Taper. How far does that go into the Town of Duck?
I think it goes 1,000 feet into the Town of Duck. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna get out there with my marker.
I'm not
That
sure,
might write me up to-
I'm not sure exactly what street that is, but it's about 1,000 feet.
Okay, interesting.
Okay, it only goes to
Robert, do we need a motion on this to give direction to staff?
I guess it's my impression that option 3 is consistent with previous direction that you've given the engineer. And so unless somebody wants to make a motion to change that direction, then it sounds like to me that you don't need to take any action.
Thank you, Robert. I think that ends the discussion on that. Ken, we appreciate it very much. We're going to go on to item number 2, discussion consideration of fiscal year 2021-22 budget ordinance and capital improvement plan. Drew, do you want to kick that off?
So I won't be making a presentation. I've done that at least twice now. So this is just the summary. You have the budget ordinance in your agenda package. So the budget ordinance does include the tax rates, the ad valorem, the 2 MSD tax rates. The budget ordinance also includes the Beach Nourishment Capital Reserve Fund, the schedule of rates and fees, and the position and classification schedule. So that's all in that same ordinance that we're asking to be adopted. Budget still is balanced. You have in your packet and in the slide deck that I gave you, just again, the summary. You have this in the budget document, and I presented this to you again a couple of times. A $13.9 million budget. Largely driven, and those numbers are a little higher than normal because of some of these projects, particularly the brick project is into here. So you have that in your budget materials as well, what the capital impact on this budget is. So, and then the Beach Nourishment Capital Reserve Fund, again, we're setting up by ordinance this fund in order to properly account for the revenue proper restriction of the use of those funds. And that's all I have.
Drew, just one question for you. The ARP funds, the $120,000 coming to the town of Duck.
Yes.
If in fact, that could be either, that would just be an input to next year. It would not be required in the budget or a budget amendment for next year.
So that'll come in 2 tranches of roughly 60,000 each. And been talking with Teresa about that. We may need a council action once we know what that dollar amount is. And if we do, we'll come back to the council with that. But it's, the rumors are that those checks have started to go out to local government. So this is direct to local government. And we'll get roughly 60,000 within the next, within this month, likely. And then the other 60 will be exactly 1 year after, and that's part of the legislation that enabled those funds. There's still a lot of question about how those funds can be spent. I'm hoping to get a little more clarity. I've sat through webinars from the League of Municipalities, from the International City County Managers Association and the National League of Cities. And there seems to be a general lack of clarity, especially for organizations like us. We can't point to pandemic-related significant loss of revenue here. Matter of fact, if you look at our fiscal 21 financial results, we've outperformed other years. So we're going to have to be a little more not inventive. We're going to have to really pay attention to the law and be sure that we're spending the money appropriately. And we're going to have to come to you all and say, here are some recommendations. How do you want to spend this money? Because that has to be accounted for separately and very in federal government detail. So we'll be back to you for action and advice. And I hope, I've got a North Carolina Managers Conference next week, and there'll be significant conversation about this as well there. So hopefully get a little more guidance.
So if that money came in the next fiscal year, it would actually go into restricted fund. Would we end up increasing the bottom line on our budget, or would that just be?
It would likely increase the bottom line on both sides.
Okay.
Yeah. So it will have to be restricted. So no matter what happens, no matter when the money comes in, it doesn't go into unrestricted general fund balance. It's restricted by law.
Thank you. Okay, with that, open for discussion on the budget ordinance.
I'd like to make a couple of comments about the budget. I appreciate everything you've done, Drew, and the managers in general, the staff, to come up with, a succinct need analysis and how we can pay for it in a responsible way. I have heard some public comments. We've seen a few emails from concerned folks that are non-residents talking about a few things. You know, everyone's seen them, higher budget year over year. Our increased budget does reflect the increased debt service that we've had to handle with Beach Nourishment, and then now going to the BRIC grant. That BRIC money, if we get it in the next year, will actually save the town quite a bit of money, as well as give us a project. You know, we've said it before, something like 600,000 on if we don't have the BRIC grant, and doing the same local projects that we had wanted to do versus raising the road and having more grant money available was in the 200 range, 250 or 245, whatever. So there are benefits to the BRIC grant that I think everyone should be excited about, and I will be really happy to see where that goes if we can get that moving. I think it would really, really help. But the other big part of the budget is the expenditure on personnel. And I really, you know, having been in this town for a really long time, I know that was a concern when we became a town, is how big is this town going to grow? But we've heard for years from our public safety folks that we really needed to increase this personnel, so we have safety and we have coverage, and the firefighters are doing dual duty, as I look at it from my perspective, of doing not only helping us in the event of a fire and our neighbors, but also for medical assistance, and that's something that's really critical, and I think we can all agree on the fact that that's a really great thing. And even our police respond to medical things if they're the first responder sometimes. You know, I mean, there's just it's important to have redundancy, and that's something we've heard from our chiefs. So I, you know, am going to stand behind the need for filling out those forces, which is going to cost money. And then you look at this administrative side of our town, and you also see, I believe, the need for redundancy and for being able to back each other up. We've grown. It's a sophisticated amount of work we do. The staff has done, I think, amazing things, Herculean things over the years. But we need, you know, backup. We need checks and balances. We need to be able to rely on just more than one person to do one job. So all in all, I think that the increase in personnel and the maintenance person going full-time will save the town. It'll save town money, and it's a good thing. So even though we're having a big jump in personnel, I, for one, don't think we're really going to have to go any further than this, and I wouldn't look for us to go any further than this in terms of personnel. The other public comment I heard was about decreasing some costs, and I think I saw something like volunteer parties, which can't be a huge amount of our budget, but the volunteer party, maybe some people thought was too much to spend. So as we move down the road, you know, let's look at our costs all year long. I'll challenge all of us to not just assume that we're going to, just because we have the budget for get together, an annual celebration. I mean, we are going to celebrate our 20th anniversary, and I think that's kind of important, but, you know, we can do it. We don't go crazy on parties, but, you know, I mean, I definitely don't want the people to think that the town is being frivolous. So I, for one, will be asking a lot of questions about the, you know, cost of things. And let's face it, we have a unusual expense that we do, but I think we do a lot with it, which is have events. And we didn't have any last year, but it's something that draws people to our town. It's fun. It's a nice thing for people to do, both locals and visitors. So I think you know, the Jazz Festival, we don't make money on the Jazz Festival, but it's a really great thing. And so, you know, as we move forward, this budget allows us to do those events, and I'm in favor of another year of that. But if people want to start really digging in and saving money, then, you know, if that's low-hanging fruit, I'm willing to listen. to that. But all that to say, I am going to vote in favor of the budget as presented. I just wanted to put a few things out there because it's a higher budget, and but the personnel is the main reason, and I think it's justified. And I thank our staff from top to bottom, everybody who's done things for the staff. For the town. Our staff has done amazing things, and I think I'm very proud of everything the town has done since its inception. So that's all I'll say right now.
Thank you for your comments, Monica. Anybody else? Discussion?
I have two things, and along with Monica, we just got to remember that in our revenues, that 2.4 million from grants for the brick grant and 1.4 for the transfers were the beach nourishment taxes we got in. So we're really, our budget is down to about 10 million. You know, we're counting those two numbers that are not money that we're really taxing everybody on. It's just a certain group. And also, and I know last year, Sandy Cross had told me we did about 600 volunteer hours. And I understand the state is, I think it's $29.58 that they consider every volunteer hour's worth. So we're talking $18,000 approximately there for maybe $7,000 or $8,000. You know, maybe that's what brings some of these people in, the goal to go to a party that we're getting 600 man hours out of that we're not paying for. But again, I'm going to vote for the budget the way it is right now also, but I just wanted to point those items out that have been questioned.
Those are man hours just on the beach planning, right?
Beach planning, the town sweep of picking up trash, and townside cleanup.
Thank you, Sandy. Anybody else want to make any comments?
Well, it's hard to top what Monica and Sandy just said, but I'm going to be voting for the budget as it's presented. And, you know, just to sort of emphasize what both of you shared right now is I feel that this is a budget that reflects the importance of what we've done and is looking forward, and it's supporting, in my view, our most important resource, which is our human resources, our staff, our volunteers, the people that make up this community. I think things like jazz festivals and town events and the opportunity to volunteer build social fabric and community, and you can't put a price on that. You just can't. The state has a number for volunteers, and that's great, and it does show a lot of value, but I think, you know, people who, and I'm saying this as staff, all the staff, people who work for local government, nonprofits, public safety are, in my view, grossly underpaid and very overworked. And I think we live in a society where it's upside down. And I thank you for your service because I think it is a service to work for government and public safety and nonprofit sector. We can't, as a community or society, survive without people that are willing to do that. I know you could make a lot more money in the private sector. You choose not to. You choose to commit your time and your talent to making this a better place for all of us. I thank you, and I think that this budget really sort of zeroes in on the importance of that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, for your comments. Before I call for a motion, I agree with a lot of the comments that were just made. The budget process is really a 4-month process. Starts with the retreat, a lot of open discussion, work sessions, as well as, you know, public hearing. I think we did get some public response. I think Monica was responding to some of that, but I think it's troubling that we have a public hearing and we only had one public comment with respect to the budget that day. So I overall think we've got a good, responsible budget moving forward. There's a lot of ins and outs in that. Many of us have been with the town for a good number of years and understand the increased complexity and the need for some additional manpower to take the stress off of our existing personnel. So I'm also going to be in favor of the budget ordinance for next year. If there's no other comments, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move that we approve the budget as presented.
And capital plan?
Is that adequate?
Yeah. Is that adequate, Robert?
Approval of the budget ordinance.
Budget ordinance as presented, yeah.
And the capital improvement plan.
And the associated capital improvement plan.
Any further discussion on the motion on the floor?
Well, I would like to say one more thing, and that is that kind of reiterate what you said, Mayor, about the budget process. It starts with the retreat. There's a lot of information that's presented at the retreat, and it's a lot to sit through. I mean, we're sitting up here a lot for a lot of hours. So I commend people who do come to the retreat, or at least avail themselves to the minutes from the retreat to see where the conversation is heading. And then, you know, we had and I'll just say one more thing about the document. Some people have said that it was, you know, it was big this year. We hadn't seen that year. We've had the same town manager before. We had Drew since the inception of the town. So I've been here almost since we were a town, so I've been kind of growing with the whole budget process, but it's a lot to absorb. And I think your goal, the goal of the town manager was to make it as understandable as possible with a narrative. I think there's work to be done there, and you know, but it was a very noble effort to make it a narrative so you could read it, understand, okay, what's this, what's that, what's this. Doesn't hurt to ask anybody any questions, though. As I sat here today and asked questions about the nourishment, I mean, I'm sitting here all the time, so I welcome comments, I welcome questions about it, because I think that's how we get clarity. And I think there's also amount of, I like to just say, trust in your council to be making informed decisions for the good of the town and not any other agenda. It's a service, and it's not self-serving, I would like to say. So that's all I got to say about all that.
And just one little shout out to the person in the back there at Mission Control who puts every single meeting online, YouTube, and everything else for people to see who, you know, miss the retreat, miss the meetings, miss the presentation, or want to listen to a very complicated or detailed presentation again. Thank you, Christian. It's not 2 seconds of work, it's a lot of work. So we're really fortunate between the robust website and all of the technologies that we have available now for everybody to get all the information that they want all the time.
Yeah, and I think the meeting minutes are very detailed. I
They
don't know
are.
how they stack up against another town, but they're very detailed.
Any other comments? There being none, we'll do a roll call vote. Mayor votes aye. Mayor Pro Tem Thibodeau?
Aye.
Councilmember Mooney?
Aye.
Councilmember Whitman?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanagh?
Aye.
The budget ordinance passes 5-0. It's now 3:05. I'm going to call for a 10-minute recess to 3:15 before we get into the personnel policy manual. So please be back at 3:15. The council meeting is back in session. We're going to go on to item number 3, discussion consideration of adoption of the town of Duck personnel policies. And at this time, we'll turn over to town manager, Drew Havens. Drew?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So our reporter told me I have to make this really short because he's down to one piece of paper. So any questions? How's that bus feeling?
He's down.
Sorry about that. You know, before we get into the personnel policies, I want to start by kind of reporting back to you all on the results of the conversations that I had with all the staff. So I've sat down one-on-one and had good conversations with the folks that I get to come and work with every day. It's been a very interesting, very a wide range of personalities, as you know. but very insightful and very passionate people that we have serving the community. I'm going to start by sharing something. So Nancy sent me this. I'm sorry, Councilman Capitas sent me this a while ago, and I said, wow, this is really cool. So I think this speaks to who we are. So you had someone saying, I wish I could fly, I wish I could walk, I wish I could swim. So this is other towns wishing they were like Duck that can do it all. And this is really cool. The facial expression on the duck is priceless.
That is pretty good.
But I came away, and in summarizing all of the conversation I had, is we are very versatile. So we have a staff that has a lot of versatility. They wear many hats. Thankfully, we're going to be able to put a couple more heads under hats, but they're still going to be wearing multiple hats. That's just the way it is. We're going to have a staff now that's adequately sized for the future. And I've said that as part of the budget process. I asked a whole lot of questions, and the staff here that sat through those sessions will tell you that. But I asked everybody 2 consistent questions. I said, fill in this sentence for me. Working for the town of Duck, well, I like working for the town of Duck because. So why do you like working here? And this is what I heard. So it's not money. It's important, but that's not what people said. It was about their teammates, the people that they get to work with. They referred to the organization as being like family. They talked about the community of Duck, and you referred to the term social fabric. There is a lot of that. There's the sense of community. They feel respected and appreciated by the people that they're serving. So whether that's the elected body, the citizens that live here year-round, or the people that just come to visit, they feel respected. And they talked about collaboration and being empowered. It was really interesting to hear some of these insights from my coworkers. So, the biggest piece of this pie really is, it's all about the people they get to come to work with every day, which is really cool. And I know he'll be embarrassed for me saying this, but I put a lot of this on Joe. He kept this organization together and really brought them together as a family through a crisis, right? So this is the result of that, and this is the result of very resilient people. I also asked, the other question was, working for the town of Duck would be better if. Somewhere in here in really small print is money. Again, so it was the biggest piece, more staff. We need help. I heard this primarily from public safety. I don't feel I can even call in sick because it's going to leave us shorthanded. I don't want to take a day off because it's going to leave us shorthanded. So I think the chiefs are telling me we've solved that problem with this budget. So we're moving in the right direction. Retiree health coverage was a big one for folks, and that's in this draft personnel policy. Career progression. So when we hire a new firefighter or a new police officer, what can they expect their career to look like? Especially when you have such a small organization. You've got a police department with 2 sergeants and a fire department with 3 captains. Not everybody's going to get to that, but what can they achieve as they're doing that? So that was important to them. Better communication, and then some talk about consistent leadership, that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting insights from folks, especially when you set the atmosphere of, this is your opportunity. Tell me what we can change. How we can make this organization better for all of us that work here. And then this is just the pie chart, and you have this in front of you. So I wanted to take that couple of minutes just to report on that before we get into the personnel policy. So some of the things that we could do better or change to make it better to work here, you've already done. in the budget. Some of the others we're going to talk about as we go through the personnel policies. So you have the draft personnel policies that Becky Beasy created for you. We made some changes to that, and I highlighted those to council. We then had John Leidy go through them, and John made some changes to them as well. And we're going to go through some of the more significant changes between kind of our current policy, the draft, and what we have now that we're asking you to approve or to consider at least. And then there's some decision points along the way that, and I had emailed you, again, I apologize for the amount of information that I sent you. So you got the draft, the red line draft after John reviewed the policy. You had our old policies or our current ones, and then some different one-pagers that were actually 2 pages explaining some of the differences and some of the decision points that we would like you to consider. So basically, trying to take it from the front to the back. The first one that's a little different and a little bit of a kind of a point of input for you all. This has to do with compensatory time or comp time. So when someone that is non-exempt, works in excess of 40 hours, or works in excess of their regular scheduled pay period, they can earn comp time where they get paid time and a half. Obviously, our preference would be to give them the time off as we can. The concern that I had with the language that Becky Beasy came up with in her draft was the thresholds. So you could accumulate a lot more comp time than I've seen organizations been able to accumulate. And what's interesting about comp time is that it accrues as a liability. So if someone separates from employment, you have to pay them all those hours. That's hours and actually money they've earned. So one of the options here is so option 2 is to modify that paragraph 7 in that section. So it eliminates the mandate for pay as opposed for allowing the leave to accumulate. So the way it's written is if they get over the threshold, we get to pay it out. What I'm recommending is that we reduce the accrual threshold, and anything in excess of the accrual threshold goes to vacation time. And then if they're over the threshold of vacation accrual, the policy that's drafted now already addresses that by having that roll into sick time. Vacation time and comp time accrue as a liability, sick time does not. So when someone separates from employment, they don't get paid their sick time. They do get paid their vacation time and their comp. That makes sense?
And how does the sick time get a cap or no?
There's no cap on sick time. The benefit to the employee of sick time is that's used for creditable service. So as they're working towards retirement, you can convert those hours of sick into months, years, days of creditable service towards retirement. So basically allows you to retire a little earlier with that full benefit.
Just in the town, like it doesn't go from municipality to municipality if they were to change, or it does?
So it does. Well, it depends on one of the other things we're recommending in this policy, or Becky recommended, was that we include a transfer provision. For instance, when I came here, one of the things I asked for, and as we were talking about my contract, was to be able to transport my sick time. Most cities do that. So there is, and we can talk about that now, and we'll skim over it when we get there. One of the benefits of being able to take that sick time is that when we want to look at another municipal employee to come work here, they're going to ask that question: can I bring my sick time with me? And if we say, well, no, you can't, that sometimes is a decision point, because that's hours they've earned, and they've already started to calculate.
Counting
You
back.
know, yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, they're, of course, all that is predicated on them not getting sick and using the sick time for what it's
Right.
really intended for.
Interesting.
So I guess, so what we're looking for here is a little bit of guidance on what you want to do with the compensatory time and the options that were presented.
Do you have a question about comp time? So, you know, I came from nonprofit and academia where underpaid, overworked, but we got comp time. But that being said, sometimes it was really hard to take it, because go back to a couple of your slides before that is, you know, a comment from staff people saying, I don't want to take time off because it hurts my staff, my fellow staff people. So how realistic, like, the accumulation of comp time is probably very different for police and fire and other types of, you know, other admin, right? Where it might be easier for some positions to take it and not easy at all for public safety, I'm thinking. I don't know. And that's...
I think it got easier with the vote you all just took.
Okay.
So adding additional personnel will allow, for instance, Chief Black to be able to allow people to be off and still maintain minimum coverage, and the same thing with Chief Ackerman. So it's a number of personnel. And so as you get to that appropriate level, people can take time off.
Okay.
Drew, how do you want to deal with these as you go through? Do you want us to give you an option on these, or what?
I think that, yeah, that way we keep working through sequentially. If we get to one where you say, all right, we don't have enough information to make this decision, pass. And then we can hold on that one. And I think there's probably going to be a couple of those as we get through. Matter of fact, there's one section I'm recommending that you hold on anyway.
So for instance, this one here, I mean, there are three options. So if we do nothing, we're leaving the language in the draft as is, right?
Correct.
With the red line or not?
He just highlighted it. He just, on that,
Yeah, but we're going to get some other red lines, I think, aren't we?
I don't notice Mr. Light made. Did he make a comment on that one, page 15?
The one I got doesn't have the red comments.
it's a separate document with.
I'm on line here.
Yeah, John made it was a wording change and not a benefit change, so it's not substantive. I hate to say it's not substantive, but I mean, it was good input from the attorney.
Yeah, I was really glad he went through it. Where's
Well, if there are any issues with it, he's going to be the one we're going to ask to resolve them. So.
Shoot. But the staff recommended language, isn't that in here?
So I'm recommending so there was a separate document that I sent you.
That's what I'm trying, oh, was it a separate, it wasn't in the agenda package. How did I miss that?
And really, the substantive change between the draft from Becky and what I'm suggesting is that the comp time balances 100 hours as the threshold for non-public safety and 200 for public safety personnel. Her draft has 240 hours for non-public safety and 480 for public safety. You know, that's 6 weeks of comp time.
Yeah.
We need to manage better.
Yeah.
rather than having that buildup of comp time. Really, we want people to, as they're entitled to take time off, to be able to do that, because we want to emphasize life-work balance. So we don't want them to be working all the time.
Is there any guideline that says, you know, try to take it off within a 2 to 3 week period?
So I'd have to go back and reread the current language. So, but there is, you know, you try to flex it out within the current week, as opposed to the current pay period. But
I know that's not I know that that's not possible. You know, you have a heavy summer schedule and you're working 7 days a week or 6 days a week, and you can't take the time. But I also understand the problem when it starts to accumulate to a point where, you know, someone could be gone for a month and a half. That does hurt your other staff people, so.
right, and you know, a month and a half, 6 weeks straight of vacation would not get approved. At least not likely to get approved.
Will that affect the summer event people? How do you handle that now?
So it's flexed. So it's basically, we're basically trying to do the same thing. You know, I know that, you know, Chief Ackerman in his budget, his budget proposal this year, he's actually reduced his overtime because getting the 2 additional patrol officers, and he'll still be able to allow people to take time off as opposed to paying them overtime. So that's the goal. We don't want to wear people out and burn them out. We can help it. Take the time off when we can.
So you're suggesting reach a threshold, and when it's reached that threshold, then it rolls into sick time.
So it rolls into vacation time.
Vacation time.
And vacation time has a 240-hour cap on it.
Okay.
So, you know, so someone hasn't used all of their vacation and they have 100 hours there, they're really not losing their comp time. It's just rolling into vacation. And then if they have too much vacation built up, then it rolls into sick.
Okay.
And again, that's a management problem. So if someone has, you know, 240, 300 hours of vacation time built up, that's a management problem. You know, they need to be encouraged to take time off.
Yeah.
I think that's a good recommendation. I propose that we go with your recommendation on that. If, you know, based on your experience, I think that's, you know, it's certainly not, it's just more of an accounting thing, and it's not taking away anything, but it's just capping, which I think is good. So I would recommend that we modify paragraph 7 using your recommended language.
Well, basically, we're agreeing unless we want to defer something for further discussion, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Is there objection to that?
No.
There's not.
No.
No, I think it's good.
No.
All right, we'll push on. This is in the draft from Becky. Was not in her original draft, so this is something that we had recommended to her. So professional leave, this is essentially comp time for exempt staff. So when Christian has to work a council meeting, she would be able to bank, if you will, comp time. Because she's exempt, I mean, she's not entitled to overtime. And Joe's the same way, not entitled to overtime. You can work all the overtime hours you want when you're exempt. This just allows exempt folks to accumulate up to 40 hours, does not accrue as a liability per this policy. So if someone separates from employment, they have 40 hours in their leave bank, they don't get that. Again, it's not something to which an exempt person is entitled. It's an added benefit for exempt folks that we're asking to work in excess of 40 hours. So that is in the draft that you have.
It is there.
Yes, ma'am.
It's in the draft in the
Right,
agenda.
allows in accordance
Yes.
with that, professional leave may not exceed a balance of 40 hours. Such leave is not guaranteed to be taken and ends without compensation upon separation. That's the language.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Down for any reason. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
See, included in the draft from MAPS is, this is a new benefit, this is longevity pay. Something that I've seen in other cities, I've seen it in the other two that I've managed. It's not something that is currently in our personnel policy. Something she's recommending as a best practice, and obviously up for conversation.
I'm not quite sure why we need that. I mean, it's not really a matter of money. I mean, our employees get merit and bonus. So obviously, you know, we should be able to make that up in the bonus. You know, I guess I don't really agree with longevity. I mean, most organizations, it's recognition, certificates, you know, gift certificates, but I'm not sure why we really need the longevity dollar amount in there. And it's certainly pretty insignificant when you get to the first 10 years. So
I think that the difference here is that the longevity pay will help in their pension eventually, correctly? Is that correct?
So it does come as compensation.
Right.
Yeah, so it'll add.
But a bonus does not.
Bonus, so the bonus does.
It does.
Yes, sir. Yep. Yeah, any compensation is taxed and benefited.
Say it again?
Is taxed and benefited.
So it counts. So this would
Right.
just be an additional thank you right around the holiday time, in addition to an annual increase that might be more on their calendar-based, you know, annual.
At their, the employment
At their
anniversary
annual.
day. Yes, ma'am.
What, do you know what the cost is per year as of, like today?
So it's 12,400.
it's right at the bottom of that.
Oh,
And that is included in the adopted budget. But if, so, you know, if the council doesn't approve that as a benefit as part of this policy, that's just money that will not get spent out of the budget.
I'm in favor of it. Like I said last time when we were talking about, you know, continuity on our boards and our committees, I think institutional knowledge and longevity and all of that is important. Again, like I said earlier today, I feel like people who do work for the public good are often not paid what corporate America is, and anything that we can do to reward our employees for working for the public good, I think is appropriate. And, you know, you'd like to be able to pay them more, but this is, you know, maybe some people would see this as an insignificant amount of money. That's not really for me to say. I think this could be a significant amount of money and a nice thing. And I also think for people who work on the Outer Banks, the cost of living is high and the challenges of housing are great. To do anything again to incentivize longevity so that we don't have turnover of staff is a good thing. I like this.
I don't have an issue with it. I am a little confused about the years of service, though. Where is it 1 year to 4 and, you know, just shy of 5 years? Because it's like, where does that cutoff come, you know? To me, that's a little,
Yeah, we'll have to clean that up. Yep.
yeah, I don't know exactly where we
More
fall on.
language, so yeah, we'll, yeah.
But I don't, I mean, for the amount of, I think, for the reasons that Nancy stated and the fact that it's just a nice way to thank people around the holidays, it seems like it's not anything too extravagant.
How common is this in local, county, state? federal.
So I'm just looking at
Certainly not common.
the table that Ms. Veazey prepared. So it's common. Some do, like Bald Head Island's doing a week of pay. Kill Devil Hills actually does it. Kill Devil Hills, Manio, Currituck County, Dare County, all do it as a percentage of salary. Southern Shores does it as a fixed amount. Nags Head is a fixed amount. Kitty Hawk does not do it.
And one of the things that really stuck with me when we had the presentation by Becky was, around pay in class, is that you don't want to be lagging behind, and you kind of want to find that sweet spot in the middle so that you're competitive. I mean, you could be out front leading the way, but I think it's nice to be leading the way, or at least be in what everybody else is doing, again, so we don't lose good people.
I'm just not used to seeing that. Certainly never did that in corporate America, but I'll go along with whatever the council agrees to. I think if we get turnover in the early years, not in the later years.
I like it. I think it's something that we should use.
I'm definitely accustomed to that kind of practice in my company, doing something at the holiday time, annual. So I'm in favor of it.
Sounds like the majority of us say go ahead.
Okay. We'll move on. So this is a little nuanced. So the outside employment, our current policy that we're working under, actually, someone works a second job. According to our policy, the council has to approve it. That's not been the practice. And it's really not a practice that I've seen anywhere. So Becky's recommendation is it has to be approved by the manager. We worked with her a little bit, so we're actually including some language in there. It has to be reapproved annually. So that gives the department head and the manager a chance to evaluate the impact of outside employment on primary employment. If there's no objection to that, just basically it's taking council out of the administration.
And we never did it anyway, so.
Right. Well, one of the goals here is to get a set of policies, and then we're going to follow them. So if it says it's coming to the council, my intent is it's going to come to y'all. And we're going to hold all 40 employees of the town accountable to follow the policies, and that's something you're going to hold me accountable to be sure that we're all following them. So yeah, if practice isn't matching up with policy, we need to adjust one or the other. So in Article 5, Section 6, which is on page 23, this is filing complaints regarding harassment. The only change that staff had recommended to Becky was to include the town attorney as a recipient for complaints. When the attorney, when John reviewed this, he also recommended that the mayor be a person that is a recipient of complaints. He and I will differ a little bit on that, and it has nothing to do with the person sitting in the mayor's seat today. The reason I wanted the attorney to be a recipient is if an employee files a harassment complaint, say they want to complain against me, if they go to Robert and file a complaint, he has to notify his client. I think you're ethically obligated to notify his client, which is all 5 of you. There's no such obligation that I know of on the mayor. It's good to have another avenue. That's fine if you want to include that. John's recommending it. I'm not going to argue one way or the other more than I already have. But I do really want to have the town attorney be a place where somebody can go and make a complaint.
Right, because as I understand it, I read with great interest the harassment section of the personnel policy, and I was going to get that clarified for myself, that anyone can go to, in this case, the way it's written, to the attorney. It doesn't have to go through the department head. It can go directly to, which I think is a good thing. I don't have a problem if it's a choice. I would like the idea of, and I don't know why John, except that he said, John Lighty said that I would have to tell everybody, but why not? I guess the confidentiality was how I read it, that he was worried that, I say everybody, the town council, I mean, but to me, we're going to keep things confidential, and it's good to have everybody be informed.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So if the attorney is a recipient of a complaint, the attorney would have to inform his client, which is the body. If a member of council receives a complaint, you're not obligated, like he is, under his professional standards, that he has to inform his client of what's happening. So that was the only reason I wanted to be sure that the attorney's in there. It's up to you. If you want to have the mayor in there too, that's fine. That's a decision point for you all to make. But I think it's important. I think John Lighty also thought it important that the attorney be in there as well.
And of course, it says or, so
Right. There's a choice.
it really is up to the employee to decide to pick any or all of the persons that are listed. So it's not mandatory that it go to any one particular person. And I'll just, John couldn't be here today. I'll just read the comment he made about it. He said, experience has also shown that the ability of an employee to make a complaint to a member of the governing council can also be very important for successfully defending harassment claims. But I don't have any more elaboration than that. But certainly Drew makes a good point that if the town attorney receives a complaint, then we answer to the town council. And so there is a duty of informing the town council of complaints and things that affect you. So I think there are valid points on both sides of it. And like I said, no matter how it's worded, it's really ultimately up to the employee to decide who they want to notify. I think having the attorney in there is very good because, again, the attorney answers to the council, doesn't answer to anybody else.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is good, but rather than have it just be the mayor, insert any member of the council. That if somebody has a complaint that they wanted to approach any member of the council, that they could do that in confidence and then handle it accordingly.
Well, the way John probably perceived it is if a complaint came to the mayor would go to the town attorney, obviously. Or any council member should go to the town attorney for direction. I mean.
So, I mean, that's certainly could be a member of the elected body.
I like that.
At the end of the day, the more people that are available to receive a complaint, the better we have it.
I agree.
In the obligation to go forward to the attorney is stated or implied. If the complaint goes to a member of council, then there is an obligation to go forward to the attorney?
I don't believe that's
not stated in the policy.
I think it should be. To me, it seems like the healthier thing to do is to have it, if a complaint comes to the attorney, it goes to the council. If a complaint comes to any one of the council members, it goes to the attorney, who then in turn will advise all of the council.
That makes sense.
Well, the way this is written is that anybody that receives it goes to the HR officer, who's going to then conduct or direct an investigation into whatever the complaint is. And that's a big piece that we were missing before, and I think that this kind of covers it.
Except, well, there was a huge piece missing before because we didn't have that written in there, right?
Right, but,
Right.
so now we do.
Right.
So I'm hearing to change where it says mayor to member of the elected body.
Or any member, and that's consistent with John's comment. He didn't limit it to necessarily just the mayor, so it could simply say any one or more members of the town council. So theoretically, the employee could give notice to all the council members or any one council member.
And that would even be better if he went to every one of us.
Yeah, I think so.
So anyone or
But
all
the real
members.
question is, do you really want council dealing, we have one employee, the town manager. So if we get a complaint, the mayor pro temp, or any council member, I think it should be directed to the town attorney. I'll let the attorney set the direction of where it goes from there. That should be part of the policy.
The policy, though,
That was
the
the way I
policy
understood
line, it clearly states that the complaint, regardless of who receives it, is to be directed to the HR person.
Yeah, but I'm saying it,
And that person then is responsible for the investigation. That may include the attorney, depending on what the complaint is about. It may be something small or it may be some large thing, but whatever it is, that's the starting point.
but I just think that our attorney should have knowledge of something that's brewing within the organization like that.
Well, then we should include language that the
Yeah,
HR
exactly.
person notifies the attorney.
Yeah, my understanding of the additional layers was if the complaint is against the HR officer, who is me. So
Right.
I'm obligated, if someone files a harassment complaint, I'm obligated to conduct that investigation as the HR officer. If I am the offending party, no one's going to come to me and file a complaint against me.
Right.
So we want to be sure that there is somewhere else for them to go other than to the HR officer. So that is the council, one or more members of the town council, or the town attorney.
Or the department head.
It's just my feeling, if any member of council has gotten involved by getting that complaint, then they need to take it to the town attorney for direction. I mean, that's where the policy, to me, I think it should work. The town council should not be working that complaint.
So you would say anyone receiving a complaint will make the human resources officer and the town attorney aware of the complaint?
That would probably be good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wait, just 1 second on that. As Drew just described, suppose the complaint is about the HR officer.
Yeah.
So do we want to notify that person who's going to be the subject of the investigation, or do we want to just notify the attorney?
Well, it says here, may follow the grievance or may file the complaint directly with the human resources officer, department director, town manager, mayor, elected officials, or town attorney. So they don't have to go to the resource officer.
Well, but that's what you just said, was to go to report, anything that's reported to us is supposed to go.
Well, yeah. Well,
So
then-
if somebody reports to us, we're supposed to go to the HR director according to this document.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, I mean, you either have to inject common sense or write it down so that everybody gets it,
Yeah.
that if the complaint is against the HR director, then it's got to go to the attorney.
Well, it could be against the town attorney.
Well, then he's out.
So, yeah.
And we could just say, unless the person is the subject of the harassment complaint, maybe something like that. Because that makes sense, and then it's laid out, and then you don't have to identify everybody. You can just say, anyone receiving a complaint will make the human resources officer aware of the complaint unless,
That person is the subject of the
right,
complaint.
or anyone, yeah. I mean, it doesn't make any sense that do you
Do you want us to go back and work with John?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the policy, I mean, the way the guidance here is meant to be somewhat, just the goal was to be a little bit more expansive about recipients so that the employee can make a decision as to who the employee feels like the complaint should be given to. And we can't predict all the different circumstances, which is sort of what we're trying to do here. And so that's why there's a lot of use of the word may and a lot of use of the word or in this paragraph, because you're providing options and you're providing a fair amount of flexibility in this particular paragraph. And that's on purpose, so that the employee can have flexibility if the circumstances warrant that. I like the idea of keeping it flexible. It's really up to you to decide if you want to add or subtract potential recipients of, a complaint or grievance.
I think that's right. I mean, at the end of the day here, what we're trying to do is eliminate the fear factor of somebody who has a complaint that holds back because they're afraid they think that the person that they're going to complain against is going to get that, and then it's
And retaliate.
going to retaliate.
And
So-
again, it's helpful to have the attorney in there just because the attorney only answers to the council.
And
no one
also
else.
is going to have that legal guidance and know the right way to handle things appropriately.
Well, they're more independent than pretty much anybody else
Right.
in your
So the
org chart.
So I think, if I'm not to speak for the whole council, but I think everyone likes the idea of expanding that so that the employee feels they have options, but that line that says anyone receiving a complaint will make the human resource officer aware of the complaint, maybe that just needs to be the attorney then. I mean, that's the rub right there, because otherwise, I mean, you did say in case it's the attorney, but that's a little weird.
I mean, the only thing that what I would like to see is that the employee has the option of going to the human resource officer, the town attorney, or any person on the council, and that just as the town attorney has an obligation to inform the council, that whoever is the recipient of the information has an obligation to go forward to the attorney and/or the human resource officer. So, he has a legal obligation to tell us. I just would like to see something imposed that an elected official has an obligation to go forward to the right source, the attorney or the human resource officer. That it not be like, well, you don't have a legal obligation. Well, I want it stated that we do.
Right.
I don't like the and/or, I like and.
And?
Because, I mean, that shouldn't stop with the HR officer, should also, an harassment should involve legal, so it doesn't spread a lot of control.
Unless they're the subject of the complaint.
What's that?
Unless they're the subject of the complaint.
I think, we'll go back and we can work on, we can work on this one a little more to tighten it up. I think we've got some input. We'll get some language. I'll work with John and Robert and see if we can get some language that you like better. So Article 6, Section 11, which is on page 29, this is a tuition assistance program. This is not currently in our existing personnel policies. The note here is I'm recommending that we remove this to a later date. This is not something that we have put costs to yet, so we've seen a little more time on this. So if you're considering approving the personnel policies, we'd ask that you defer this one until we can give you a little more information, have a little more conversation with you about whether or not to add this.
And the interpretation of this is really outside education, over and above their particular job or credentialing, things like that, right?
Correct. So your job required training and career development training that we're paying for, the fire department, police department, Joe and the work that he does as a professional planner. Yeah, we're paying for all that anyway. This is, when Joe wants to go and get his PhD, he would have a little bit of tuition assistance, because PhD is not required for his job.
Okay.
yet.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm
to
fine with
table it.
deferring it.
Yeah.
So we'll defer that and we'll come back and have some conversations with you. Yeah, so this one, this is a new one as well that Becky put in. It's retiree health insurance. Remember, there was some staff input about this. So essentially what this is when people reach their retirement age, their full service retirement age is if you're going to include this in your personnel policy, I recommend that we change some of the language as I provided to you in that separate document to specifically say full service retirement. So once they reach that, their health insurance is paid for by the town until they reach the age of Medicare.
My first question is, based on the group we have today, what would it cost us a year?
The actuarial part of this is that's the rub. Yeah, so it is, you would be looking at carrying a liability on your financial statements, $1.5 million. Now that's not an annual check that you're writing, because that's just, that is an accrued liability.
Just like your retirement plan, you got to keep filling it ahead of time.
Yes, sir.
This is something that's gotten all governments in trouble financially, so I think we really should defer this for further discussion.
Yeah, in other states where there's not as much control over the pension system, and, you know, I will tell you that in my prior employer, I advocated for removing this as a benefit. Now, we were looking at $41 million on our financial statements as a liability. So with a staff of 500 that continued to grow. We have a staff of 40 that won't.
But it's
I just
all,
think
but,
that
it, but it's all relative.
the percentages are kind of 25 years at 100%. That's kind of,
It is
pretty generous.
It is. It is on the beach, it is a very common benefit. In other places in the state, it is. Some are adding, some are subtracting. It is a recruitment tool as well, so we can say to somebody, come work for our fire department. You know, not only do you get retirement, but you get this retiree health care, which, you know, other places, you know, the nonprofit fire companies can't offer this. So again, you know, and police, as they're looking to transition, you know, earlier in their career, you know, Chief Ackerman likes to hire some people with experience. They've got 5 years in another municipality somewhere. You know, they do the math, and if this isn't something that's available to them, it may be a decision point for them. I could stand here and argue both sides of this forever, and I won't do that tonight. So if you want to, again, if you want to defer this, tell me what you want for information. Teresa threw that kind of that 1.5, so we're kind of somewhere between what Southern Shores is carrying and what Kitty Hawk is carrying for that liability. The actuarial study is actually quite involved in order to do this.
I mean, I'd like to see us have further discussion on that, but I'd also be cautious in comparing ourselves to other towns, because how recently have they resolved their personnel policies? You know, their policies could have been in place for a long time, so.
I don't feel like I understand it well enough, so I'm fine with deferring it and examining it further, like at the retreat or at a work session where, you know, maybe a work session that's just about personnel issues.
I completely agree with that.
You know, that maybe not at the retreat, but maybe at a work session where we can really dig in, and maybe Becky comes back, I'm not sure, but.
I'm not opposed to exploring it and further, but it is, it's something I can't decide on right now.
Another change, this is just a very minor change, so it's, we follow, this is to change us to follow the state's holiday schedule and also include President's Day, which the state does not do. The biggest change here is Columbus Day, which the state does not do, we currently do, so the proposal here is to not have Columbus Day as a holiday and have the addition, that 13th holiday be the day after Christmas. So basically a 3-day Christmas similar to what the state does. Full disclosure, so while we won't have a holiday on Columbus Day, we will close Town Hall administratively that day, because that's the day after Jazz Fest, and we've just worked everybody to death that weekend. So we will close that day, but it will not be a paid holiday.
Oh, that's how that works.
And while we're talking about holidays, can you just clarify what happens with staff that has to work on a holiday?
Under the new policy, yes. Under the old policy, I couldn't even begin to tell you.
Okay.
It's a little convoluted under the old one. Under the new one, everybody gets paid the holiday.
Okay.
Everybody gets paid. 8 hours or the 8-hour equivalent. So public safety is a little different because of the schedule they work. So everybody gets paid that time. If you work the holiday, time and a half for the time you are working on the holiday.
Okay. And then do they get the holiday off in addition, or is it one or the other? It's time and a half, you're working, and it's not like, well, I'll take my 4th of July in September.
So there would be the opportunity, I believe, to put it into comp time.
Okay.
So they could do that. The way, unfortunately, the way our policies are structured now, and I didn't believe it until Chief Ackerman told me about 4 times, and I finally got it. It actually pays someone more to be off on the holiday than to work it. So the incentive is to have the day off. Whereas he's trying to put patrol officers on the street, and the chief is trying to put firefighters in fire trucks. And we want to acknowledge the fact that we're asking the people to work the holiday, or they're apart from their family on the holidays. Some of it is, okay, that's what you signed up to do, right? Police and fire. I mean, I worked holidays. I know Mr. Mooney had to work holidays. So it also it's just that a little bit extra compensation for being away from your kids.
But like our events people have worked on, like, not last year, but they've worked on the 4th of July, they've worked on Memorial Day, doing concerts, doing events, doing parades. So I just, we live in a summer tourist town where people are like, oh, what are you doing for the holiday? It's like, we're working. It's like, what do you mean, what are we doing for the holiday? There's no holiday. So, yeah. Not when you live in a tourist town in the summer, no.
Right.
So, yeah, I just want to make sure that all the staff that's working all these summer holidays and winter ones too, I just wanted to be clear on that.
I have no problem with that change, and it's good to know that we won't be open on Columbus Day.
Right.
Just not paid.
Yeah, then I mentioned the compensation, so it aligns us with how other places are doing it. It aligns us with best practice, and it gets rid of the lack of clarity that we have in our current policy. So speaking of current policy, in our current policy, we have an additional 24 hours a year of personal leave. So someone could use a couple hours here, a couple hours there for appointments and that kind of stuff. Becky is recommended to let that go away in the new policy. So because there is other leave available, especially now if we're really focused on comp time and people being able to use their comp time, the exempt folks like Joe, he won't have to take 4 hours of sick time to go to a doctor's appointment, he can use 4 hours of his professional leave, similar to the personal leave, but it's actually leave that has been earned by working in excess of the regular schedule.
Do you feel that employees will feel like they're losing time? I mean, obviously 3 days, but I mean, what do you feel the ramifications of that are going to be?
I don't know the answer to that. Did you have a sense, chiefs, or Lori, Joe?
I think there's other ways we can.
So from a practical speaking, it'll just be one less thing to track, essentially.
And Lori's laughing.
Yeah.
Yes, it would be one less thing to track.
I can relate.
Yeah, so yes, it will be one less thing we have to track, and yeah. And again, it aligns us with best practice about modernizing the policies. So vacation leave accrual. So the first 3 lines of this are what we have, and then Becky is recommending an additional tier of 20 plus years with an additional 2 days of vacation leave.
Do we need it?
Sir?
Do we really need it, the additional tier?
You know, it's that, so it's the last 10 years, I guess, of your 30-year service. If you're a career person here, you get a couple more days of vacation.
Yes.
Is it a need? I wouldn't know how to define that as a need. Again, this is something I think, as Becky looked around in the market and kind of best practice.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. 2 more days after 20 plus years.
Fine.
Okay.
And how many people do we have close to that here?
2?
And Sandy.
Oh, 3. Sandy Cross. So,
No.
About 20 years, yeah, next year.
I like it.
okay.
What do we have in the next 5 years?
I mean, it's 2 days.
I'm just,
Jared.
I'm just asking how many more people would include in the next 5 years. I'm curious, that's all.
Yeah.
Approximately. Okay.
Jared.
You had enough, those 2 people gave you the 2 days, huh?
Drew, just based on Monica's earlier comment about this type of table where you have, this didn't occur to me before, where it's 0 to 5 on the first level and then
Yeah.
5 to 10.
Yeah.
Does that still need, I mean, unless you know how to implement that,
So the way I would interpret that is 0 through 5 years of service is the first tier. So 5.00001 years would be the next tier.
as opposed to a full year, like 6 through 10.
I think it needs to be, we need to restructure that a little bit, the tables.
So it's crystal clear.
Anywhere we use that, I think it needs to be cleaned up and defined, yeah.
Defined on, what constitutes a year and where does it fall?
I mean, normally it should be 6 to 10 probably, but.
Because, it's a lot to track.
Because you see it here, so sick leave is the same based on what our current policy is. So what Becky is recommending is changing from this tiered system to a day per month for everybody, independent of length of service for sick leave. Again, more in line with best practice or not best practice, but practice that's seen throughout the state. if that's the council's desire to do that, option 2 is an ask. So if you decide to do that, could we just lock everybody in that's currently an employee where they are? So whatever tier they're in right now, they don't go backwards, in other words, in accrual. But they won't advance anymore, but they won't go backwards. So if you want to start everybody from the day that these policies go into effect going forward at a day a month, you can do that. But again, there's language there to lock it in. The other option 3, is just to leave the accrual the way it is, which is identical to vacation leave accrual. So this is another one of those decision points for you.
I say grandfather them in.
Yeah, option 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want anyone to go backwards.
No.
So Kristen just said she's having a hard time hearing Mr. Mooney.
Oh, grandfather them in.
And she couldn't hear, I guess, one thing you said, Mr. Mooney.
You don't want to take anything away from them once they've had it here.
Drew, did we miss one on page 31, vacation leave use by a probationary employee? Page 31 of the document, it had a call out by
Section 7.
Section 7. Yeah,
so
thanks, Monica.
that was just a minor wording
Oh,
change that
okay.
was made by Mr.
Sorry.
Lighty.
Okay.
So am I hearing go with
Option 2.
option 2?
Yeah, I think that was consensus. With
Yeah,
grandfather.
that's going to be a little bit to administer, obviously, but anybody new would go with that would be based on the recommendation of 1 day a month.
Right.
And that'll go into effect July 1?
With the effect of this policy, if these policies are adopted this afternoon, effective July 1, obviously minus the stuff that
Right.
we've already minused. Yeah, yes, ma'am. Okay. So I mentioned this earlier, sick leave transfer, not currently in our policy. Again, this is one of those things that, especially as the chiefs or as I or Joe now is recruiting or will be recruiting for a planner, if we can steal good talent from other cities, we want to be able to say, yes, you can bring your sick leave balance with you.
Yes.
So Article 7, Section 17, this has to do with bereavement leave.
Oh, yeah, this made sense.
So this is another time, and I've seen other cities make this change. So this is something that Becky's recommending. So right now, our current policy is, this sounds terrible to say, but 3 days per occurrence. This changes it to 5 days per year. So if someone, the thinking is you hope that someone does not experience a loss in their family more than once a year. But if they do, to be able to take up to 5 days. I know personally when I lost my father, 3 days wasn't enough to deal with that. I used other leave, obviously, to do that. And that's the thinking here is give people the option to be able to spend a little more time with family and such going through that, the process of grieving. And then obviously if there's a second occurrence, sick leave, comp time, vacation leave are all appropriate. Bereavement is obviously an appropriate use of that leave as well.
How about if you put in there second or third or additional occurrences at the option of the town manager or something like that? So you could, in fact, override the policy and say, well, you lost this parent, but now 6 months later you lost another parent, you can take another 5 days. I mean, it's humanitarian. I think, use up?
While I appreciate that, there needs to be I think there needs to be some sort of an objective standard, rather than leaving it to the subject to my or whoever's in that office, right? So 15 years, 10 years, whatever down the road, there's a new manager here. Who's to say they're going to say, well, I don't care who died? Hopefully, no council here would hire someone that felt that way. I understand what you're saying. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, the other option you could do is you could say it's not 5, it's 8 days.
Or could you say something like unused days could be moved forward in that year? I mean,
Trying to avoid tracking. So,
well, I understand.
yeah.
But they also can use their vacation time for it too.
Well, I know that, but I mean, that's,
And comp, and sick. Or you can leave it the way it is. So, 3 days per occurrence, and if someone needs, as I did the experience that I told you about, I had 3 days of bereavement leave, and I took extra time from my accumulated leave.
I would almost leave it the way it is then, because you can therefore cover additional occurrences. Because they can take other leave, right? Between
Yes, sir.
3
Absolutely.
and whatever days,
Yep.
so.
And I mean, there's no rule as to who you're going to bereave. I mean, in other words, it doesn't say close family member, or, I mean,
It outlines it.
No,
Does
there's a
it?
description in there.
is there, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't
Yeah, it does
notice.
say immediate family.
Yeah.
Immediate,
and
so-
that's defined, yes.
Yeah. It defines it.
Okay, immediate family, and they define it. Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that. I mean, I read it maybe, but,
Yeah, and obviously, if somebody has a loss, that a close personal friend that's not immediate family, I don't know of any department director here that's going to say, yeah, no, you can't take time off to go to a funeral.
yeah. And that's subjective again.
It is.
It's human, and I think we have to apply it at all times.
I like that too. I'm just wanting to make clear that the intent allows for that.
So you want to just leave it the way it was, so 3 days per occurrence?
I like the
Just put
5
the
days,
difference in-
and then they can use whatever other time they need.
We have a 5?
I'm fine with 5. I mean, I think it sounds a little more generous in the total, but we hope that there's not a lot of death in the year. But 5 definitely seems more giving.
Well, let's go with 5 and see if there's any issues in the future with that. Yeah.
Okay.
always
Yeah, so
change it.
Yeah, we can always come back and say,
Yeah.
it's
Can
a
always
problem.
make- yeah.
Okay, fair enough, thank you. In our current policy, we do have something that's called parental leave that allows folks to take, and this is 4 hours a year. This has just gotten reworded to call it school/volunteer leave, so it allows folks to actually volunteer in the community. It's 4 hours in the course of a year. So just a slight wording change. Again, just wanted you to be aware of that change. Article 9, Section 8, the name clearing hearing, something that we now have to offer.
Oh, yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, fortunately, I've only been through one of those. It was not a fun experience because, the employee could speak and the town couldn't. But we had the hearing, did what we were supposed to do in that case. So again, it's something we're required to do. So hopefully we won't get to the point where we terminate somebody and they want to have one of these, but if they do, it's required by law. Mr. Leidy will be here with us for that and prepping us for it. So it's in the policy now. So here's the grievance procedure. MAPS in the league recommended no grievance panel. That was the first draft you saw. Mr. Leidy is recommending our current grievance process, which has the grievance panel in it. He is recommending, however, the wording in our current grievance policy excludes a large number of folks from being able to use the grievance process. Department directors can't grieve, probationary employees can't grieve. He's recommending we strike all that language and say it's available to all employees, which it should be. So the question here is to go with the wording that was recommended by Becky, which does not include a grievance panel, or maintain the current grievance process that does have the grievance panel. And there, I provided you the memo that Mr. Leidy sent me. So you have that input from him there as well. And I don't, Robert, did you have anything you wanted?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I did speak with Becky briefly about her thinking on this area. I'll note that on the original draft that she prepared on page 47, she does provide, it's not the same thing as a grievance panel, but it does discuss that the manager may wish to utilize a neutral outside party to either provide mediation between the grieving department director and the town manager, or consider an appeal and make recommendations back to the town manager concerning the appeal, using someone like an HR professional who's outside of the town, an attorney outside the town who's trained in mediation, and things like that. So there is a somewhat similar process, but it's left fairly broad and generic as far as maybe to suit the circumstances. Whereas with the panel, which again is an optional process, it's not a mandatory process, is utilizing people that you've appointed in that role, should the panel ever become necessary. So again, it's really your call as far as what type of process you would like to see utilized.
I mean, myself personally I think we should eliminate the grievance panel. I don't see where that serves us any good from a standpoint of having outsiders from outside the town and the elected officials and our attorneys play a role in a grievance. And I think, once again, maybe we need to strengthen what MAPS provided us, but I don't think one of the steps should be an outside grievance panel. And I think that falls along with the recommendations of the league also, as you just noted, Drew.
Well,
I think it should be in-house.
I think I would like perhaps to suggest that we keep in place what we have until we can have a working session on this. I think it's pretty important, and we have a complete reversal or a recommendation from our attorney that's completely contrary to what you just suggested. We don't have him here, and he just says, I will be glad to discuss this in more detail with the council. I would like to avail myself of that just to hear the arguments, because I think it's really critical, and I'm not well equipped to make this one way or another. I understand what you're saying, the league, and I don't disagree with their expertise and anything that MAPS may have laid out for us. We haven't used the grievance panel. People don't maybe know about it enough, all that. And I just think that we need a little bit more information. So I might recommend that we just leave it as is until we can dig into this a little bit more and really spend some time talking about it.
Yeah, I was surprised that John took such a contrary position. My preference would be that this is a process and a procedure that every employee is entitled to, and I would prefer to see it in the hands of professional mediation, subject matter professionals, and not community people. I think it's just an untenable position for staff and for community members to have to get involved in what could be a highly confidential or, difficult situation, and I'd rather see professionals handle it, legal mediators or, human HR mediators, professionals.
It is a personnel matter too, so.
Right. Just, I guess one question is, what happens right now, like if we defer this, well, with anything that we're deferring for a little while, is the staff in limbo land?
No, we would just keep what we have.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll just, yeah. So we would just end up deferring back to the policy that's in place.
Okay. Well, let's put this a top priority then, if we're not going to make a decision today.
I just feel like I need a little more
Yeah.
information. I don't disagree with what you're saying. I don't know how you feel about it, Rob.
Yeah, I don't think that the grievance panel is necessary any longer. I think that we have a mechanism in place that we discussed pretty thoroughly. So whether it's one of the previously described things or anything that's described in this paragraph, there's a method for them to make a grievance about it and to have it investigated and a determination to happen. I don't think that we need to have a grievance panel outside. I think that that's just extraneous.
All right, well, we might have enough to
So
override
basically,
my
I think the
concerns.
consensus defer for further conversation.
Oh, well, I don't know. I'm hearing you're ready to go with it, and you're
I
ready
am.
to go with it. You're ready to go with it.
Yeah.
So I don't know, we have,
Well, I'm ready to go with it too, because I don't think the grievance panel is the way to go.
What do you think, Sandy?
I thought the league suggested that we eliminate ours
Right.
and not have outsiders on it at least. Not have outsiders on it.
Well, is there a danger in implementing the MAP suggestion with still a further review with John and Becky if required?
No, I think you can adopt the policy with the MAPS procedure in there, and then you can direct me to have Mr. Leidy attend the meeting and
throw
talk
some
through it.
holes in it.
Yeah. So,
Well, I mean, I think
yeah,
there'd be a
can change it.
value in John coming and talking about things that we want more information about anyway.
Right.
Yeah,
Just so everybody is on the same page about it. I mean,
I guess it was a red flag for me when John was like, no, we're going with our, and I thought, wait a minute. But if you guys, I mean, it's certainly laid out, and if this is what other municipalities do, I just want to hear from John. So whether it's before or after we adopt it, I don't care, because we can always change it if we want to.
The majority of cities and towns have moved away from that.
Yeah.
And the only one I know, and maybe I'm wrong, Robert, is Nag's Head. I don't know if Nag Head still has that or not.
I'm not sure either. I know that the comment you just made was what Becky told me,
Yeah.
but I don't know that independently, as far as other cities and all in the state.
This is the only place that I've seen it. I've read personnel
Okay,
policies in
well,
other cities.
if everyone's comfortable with this, then as long as we can have John come and speak to this and throw some darts at it so we can all appreciate it more, I would appreciate that.
I'm sure Mr. Leidy would love to come to a meeting.
That's right.
And we can all learn.
If I could add, it might be beneficial to also have, since we have Zoom capabilities, there are representatives from the League of Municipalities who would also be glad to, so that we're not just hearing one side of it, the pros and cons of that.
Yes. disappoint you to know that we've gotten to the end of that.
Yay.
So, it's back to you, Mayor.
So we could go ahead with the motion per with the adjustments being made during the discussion, which hopefully we've kept good notes. Robert, would
Just
that
for
be?
clarification, I guess, there's some items that we're going to be taken back and tweaked. Now, how will those be addressed? If there's, are you suggesting a motion to go ahead and approve?
Correct.
Okay, so then what about the areas that are still sort of under discussion?
Can we
So
make a motion to approve the policy minus the sections that we've identified as?
So minus retiree health, which is not a current part of our policy, minus tuition assistant, which is not part of our current policy. So those can be brought back in for additions. And then, you know, as the mayor said, I've got some notes, and I know that Kay and Lori have.
So
really
for
good
example, the policy could be adopted as is, but leave placeholders, take out those paragraphs that are still to be discussed, and maybe leave a placeholder for it, like, you know, reserved or something like that for future provision. And then you could bring those provisions back and adopt those almost piecemeal or as one group and add those to the policy at a later date.
Right.
I mean,
And
I think
the
that
same
makes-
thing with the harassment, as we're looking at maybe tweaking that language. I think if it's okay with you all, we'll add, rather than saying mayor, as John said, say member of elected body, and then we can come back to you for more tweaks to that and through some other conversations with John. That way it's broad, attorney approved, but still broad, and then we can come back relatively quickly and
To refine it.
Yes, ma'am.
And then also about the years, what about those years things? Does that need to be mentioned, or do we just capture that in the administrative part?
we'll get that administratively.
Okay.
Yeah, the bans, yeah, we'll get that corrected.
Well, is there any danger in delaying the decision until the first meeting in July to adapt with those changes? If you want to give us a clean copy, or you think we're all right to go ahead then with?
Doesn't that affect
The verbiage.
Tied to the budget.
So it's tied to the budget, it's tied to, you know, we do have a holiday coming up, and, you know, how holiday pay is handled, and it's just a clean break. I think we have enough, and I'll tell you what we'll do is I'll go back through and make the changes, the subtractions, you know, reserved for future action, that kind of stuff. And if you all approve that kind of generic motion that you're going to make, I'll send it out to you, and if you see something, say, hey, hang on a second, that's not what we agreed to, let me know that, and then we can get that corrected. Don't reply all, because then it's a meeting, and then Robert will get upset. So just come back to me.
And I'm comfortable with your suggestion only because I don't think we have that many that we're going to be identifying as needing to be refined.
Right, there's only two, really.
Yeah,
And it's
so
new. Yeah.
normally I wouldn't love what you just suggested, but I think in the light of the fact we would like to get this done before the budget starts or the new fiscal year, I'll make a motion that we approve resolution number 21-05 of the town of Duck, North Carolina, establishing an updated personnel policy with those identified reserved areas for further refinement. Is that enough for you?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the manager can circulate a, like you say, clean version with the reserved sections that would be omitted based on your approval today. And like he said, if you have thoughts that maybe that isn't what you approve, then it could always be, if there was an honest oversight in what was prepared, he could prepare another one and recirculate that, or even add it to the next meeting agenda on the consent as a ratification of what you approved previously. There's a number of ways that could be handled, but I don't have an objection to that.
Okay.
Any further discussion on the motion on the floor? We'll do a roll call vote. Mayor votes aye. Mayor Pro Tem Thibodeau?
Aye.
Councilmember?
Aye.
Councilmember Whitman?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanagh?
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's move on to item number 4.
We're still at it.
Item number 4, certain budget amendments.
We're pretty
Drew, are you going to handle number 4 with the budget amendments?
Sure. I don't have slides for these. You have the budget amendments in front of you. Just looking for a motion. You do have an updated version of number 8. So budget amendment 8, Teresa made some other changes to that. So there's it's the beach fund, the fire department, which was a budget amendment that was going to be done in November. We decided at that point just to wait and see if we needed it at the end of the year. We do. And then just some other cleanup odds and ends to be sure that we don't end the year in a deficit in any departments.
Is there any question on the budget amendments?
Does it need to be 3 separate motions?
I think you probably do one motion.
I would recommend that, but I mean, I'm not sure what the auditor would say, but I think having 3 separate motions, identifying each amendment would make the most sense.
More sense?
Would make more sense
Yeah.
to do them separately, just out of abundance of caution.
Okay.
All right, so I ask for a motion on budget amendment number 8.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve amendment number 8
Any discussion?
as presented.
Any discussion on the floor on the motion? There being none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? The motion did pass 5-0. I'll entertain a motion on budget amendment number 9.
I make a motion, we approve budget amendment number 9.
Any discussion on the motion on the floor? There being none, all in favor of amending the motion on budget amendment number 9, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 5-0. Budget amendment number 10, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion that we approve amendment number 10 as presented.
Any discussion on the motion on the floor? There being none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Drew. Going on to the next item. Timeline for the manager's performance evaluation. Per contract with Drew, his first review is due from the council on July 31st of this year and annually thereafter. We've had some preliminary discussions. I did say I would bring a timetable to the council meeting. I did give you a copy of that timetable. Basically, today, I'd like to establish the review schedule. July 7th, we'll distribute the blank form for the town council members and town manager. That is attached. July 21st, the town manager will submit his completed review form with comments to the town council. If Mayor Pro Tem Thibodeau agrees, she'll do the consolidation. Well, our input from the council will be due to her on the 28th for consolidation, and during a closed session on August 4th, we will discuss it with the town manager, including all the salary actions. So is there any objection to the schedule? I did add one item into the review at the end, and basically asking the town manager to establish his goals for the coming year. That was not on there before. I think it's important that we have town manager's goals forthcoming. And I know with Drew, it's a quick review, but that's the contract we signed. Any objection to the timeline? And Mayor Pro Tem, do you-
No, I'm happy to help, and I do like the continuity of using this form that we've used in the past, just to see how it works with a different manager, and I'm welcome to always hearing about better ways to do this review. But I like your addition of the goals, and that helps clarify it. by having it right here on the form. So I'm happy to consolidate and assist.
Any other comments from council on the schedule? Robert, I assume we need a motion to accept the schedule?
Well, actually, I don't think, you can do a motion. I'm not sure that it's necessary, but certainly if you'd like to, it won't hurt anything.
Let's do a motion to establish the schedule.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the presented timeline for the manager's performance evaluation as presented here.
Any discussion on the motion on the floor? There be none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. The next item is going to be closed session. I'm going to ask Mayor Pro Tem if she'll read the motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we enter into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143-318-11-5 to establish or instruct the public body staff or negotiating agents concerning the position to be taken by, on, or behalf of the public body in negotiating the price and/or other material terms of a contract or proposed contract for the acquisition of real property for any public purpose located at 1165 Duck Road, owned by Larry Herron, Thomas Herron, Deborah Herron, Vicki Herron, and Catherine Herron by purchase, option, exchange, or lease.
Before I take a vote on the motion, I just want to remind those that may be leaving, this will be the last Zoom council meeting we have, starting in July. It's going to be basically an in-person meeting. No council members can come in by Zoom and be no public comments by Zoom. We will continue to broadcast live on YouTube. And with that, we have a motion on the floor. All in favor of going to closed session, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? We are now in closed session. We are now out of closed session. I'd like to ask our town attorney, Robert Hobbs, if he would make the report.
Thank you, Mayor. During the closed session, the council discussed the subject matter of the closed session and gave instructions to the town manager and town attorney accordingly.
Thank you, Robert. Before we adjourn, is there any other business to come before the council? Town manager Drew Havens.
Just one quick thing. Ended up having lunch with someone that I'm acquainted with that's a financial advisor, advises other towns. He and I have known each other for years. He had done a little bit of homework on our debt profile, and he said, you know, a phone call and you can save some money. And I said, oh, do tell. So the financing for this property, so it won't be a refinance. What I've done is I've contacted BB&T and said, hey, would you lower our rate? And they said, sure. So it's not a refinance. They're going to have to redo some paperwork. It's going to cost about $3,000. The rate will go from, right now we're at 3.21 on this. It'll go down to 1.25.
Wow.
So we have a total of about $81,000 in interest remaining on this. It'll change that down to closer to like the mid-30s. So it's not, it's not bucket loads of money, but it's more than we're going to spend. And I just wanted to be sure that there was no objection from council before I went ahead and saved money.
No,
At some point, you're going to have to take an action. I didn't want to go down the path and then, and spend $3,000 and then come into you and you say, no, we don't want to save money.
No, that's great. And thank you to your that person who you were having the conversation with.
It's good to have contacts with people.
Good thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Please do.
I didn't want to do it and get ahead of the council on that. Just I figured that would be the case. You want to save money, but
good timing just before you review.
Oh,
Entirely coincidental, Mayor.
That's why we hired this guy.
Is there any other business coming before the council this evening? If not, I'll remind council our next scheduled meeting is the regular meeting on Wednesday, July 2nd, 2021 at 6 p.m. With that, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are now adjourned.